Good morning. For the record, my name is Tania Fernandes-Anderson, the District 7 City Councilor. I am the chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Ways and Means. This hearing is being recorded. It is being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Files 964. The Council's budget review process will encompass a series of public hearings beginning in April and running through June. We strongly encourage residents to take a moment to engage in this process by giving public testimony for the record. You can do this in several ways. Attend one of the hearings and give public testimony. We will take public testimony at each departmental hearing and also at 2 hearings dedicated to public testimony. The full hearing schedule is on our website at boston.gov/council-budget. Our scheduled hearings dedicated to public testimony was April 26th at 6 p.m. and the next one on June 2nd at 6 p.m. You can give testimony in person here in the chamber or virtually via Zoom. For in-person testimony, please come to the chamber and sign up on the sheet near the entrance. For virtual testimony, you can sign up using our online form on our Council Budget Review website or by emailing the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov. When you are called to testify, please state your name, affiliation, and/or residence, and limit your comments to 2 minutes to ensure that all comments and concerns can be heard. You can email your written testimony to the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov or submit a 2-minute video of your testimony through the form on our website. For more information on City Council budget process and how to testify, please visit the City Council's budget website at boston.gov/council-budget. Today's hearing is on Dockets 0480 to 0482, orders for the FY23 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations for the school department and for other post-employment benefits OPEB. Dockets 0483, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations. Dockets 0484 to 0486, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. Our focus area for this hearing will be BuildBPS and future capital planning for Boston Public Schools. Our panelists for today's hearing are Superintendent Brenna Casellas, BPS Deputy Superintendent of Operations Sam DePina, Chief of Operations Dion Irish, Mayor's Office, BPS Chief of Operations Indy Alvarez, BPS Chief Financial Officer Nate Cooter, Carrie Griffin, Executive Director, Public Facilities Department. I am joined today by my council colleagues, Councilor Aaron Murphy at large, Councilor Kenzie Bach, District 8, Councilor Liz Braden, District 9, Councilor Ruthie Louijen at large, Councilor President Ed Flynn, District 2. I will now turn to the administration for their presentation. You will have 20 minutes to present. And as I've mentioned in the past, councilors will have 8 minutes for their questioning, and it's up to them how they manage that. You will hear a sound or alarm when your time is up, and then we'll go to public testimony in between, and then a second round. And if time permits, we'll do a third round of 5 minutes each councilor. Without further ado, you now have the floor.
Madam Chair, thank you so much, Council President Flynn, other members and councilors. Thank you very much, members of the listening public. We're here today to cover 4 major areas: the recently announced Green New Deal for BPS, investments in BPS facilities, our recently unveiled Building Dashboard, and then our FY23 capital projects. When I came to Boston 3 years ago, I visited each one of our schools in my first 100 days, and I was struck by the vibrancy in each school and the people within them are incredibly dedicated teachers and school leaders and staff who work exceptionally hard for our students each and every day. But I was also struck by the condition of our school buildings, how outdated they were, and how lacking in amenities. More than half of them were built prior to World War II. So one of the first things I did was go into the mayor's office at that time, former Mayor Walsh, and said, we need a complete overhaul of our facilities, particularly to correct, how dirty and deferred maintenance within the buildings. And then I found out that our custodial staff, who is incredibly hardworking, was understaffed and had been understaffed for many years, and over the past 3 years we've been able to add 50 additional custodians who are doing the best job they can to maintain our facilities, but we need additional investments in our facilities, and at that time there was a $1 billion investment from the city, but that does not nearly match the need for what's needed in our school facilities. And then last year, under Mayor Kim Janey, we were able to announce 9 new projects, 5 new builds and 4 major renovations. And so with that, we were able to begin our engagement process and start talking about the need and build this dashboard and start the prioritization process under Chief Alvarez's leadership and Deputy DePina's leadership. And then we partnered now with Mayor Wu, with Dion Irish, who is an incredible partner and has been a partner over in the city with Pat Brophy, to look at our buildings, fix our buildings, and keep them square. So this school year now, we have a new mayor with a new vision for our schools, the Green New Deal, and she has committed over $2 billion in the next 10 years to accelerate the build projects and to get our kids the buildings that they deserve, buildings that have libraries, gymnasiums, nursing stations, clean bathrooms, playgrounds, and science labs and other maintenance that's needed. Today we come forward with a request to additionally improve painting, some of our radiator covers, some minor renovations, some renovations to White Stadium, and other important projects. That will get us toward a quality guarantee that we have been trying to initiate within the Boston Public Schools so that families, when they come, know that they have one point of transition in our academic pathways, as well as opportunities for their children that suburban kids have for the facilities work. And so what I'll do is I'll turn it over to Chief Irish, and he will speak more specifically about some of the investments in his team and some of the investments in BPS so that we can actually accelerate these projects. So thank you so much for your time and consideration of these projects.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Council President Flynn, and to all the councils in attendance, and to folks watching from home and participating remotely. My name is Dion Irish, Chief of Operations. I also bring greetings on behalf of Mayor Wu. This is a very exciting time for us and an exciting budget presentation. The Operations Cabinet is responsible for managing public facilities across the city, and our school buildings are some of our most important facilities. As the Chief of Operations, I lead an interdepartmental team that works closely with BPS, as you can see today. And we're excited to collaborate and pick up the pace on new school builds, renovations, and all types of projects. Over the last 40 years, we've only had 9 new buildings or major renovations over the last 40 years in the city of Boston. BuildBPS started to get projects off the ground, and we're excited that we'll be opening the Boston Arts Academy building this fall, and we continue construction on the Josiah Quincy Upper School, and we'll be breaking ground shortly on the Carter Elementary School. But we know that we still need to see more than one new school every several years due to decades of deferred maintenance. We'll need to pick up the pace to deliver safe, healthy, and high-quality facilities our students deserve. We're taking big steps to invest in the team and in the tools to get this work done. We're adding staff capacity in the operations cabinet, in our public facilities department, and in BPS. And in fact, we'll be adding 10 positions to our public facilities department and 15 on the BPS facilities team. And this is in addition to investments that have already been made in the past year or so. This will give us the people power that we need to manage these projects and get them done on time and on budget. With these new resources and our partnerships with BPS operations, academics, administration, and community engagement, as well as with you, school leaders, educators, students, and families, we're committed to providing Boston students with the schools that they deserve. I'll leave it there for now, and I'll pass it over to our Chief of Operations for BPS, Indira Alvarez.
No, you can leave it there. So this is one. Good morning, all. As Dion mentioned, short version, my name is Indy Alvarez, Chief of Operations for BPS. I'm going to run through my portion of this to make sure that we get into the portion of Q&A. For the FY23 capital planning, we're proposing new construction and major renovation projects as well as continued district-wide upgrades. These projects represent $605 million in city spending over the next 5 years and over $2 billion over the project's life cycle. The project selections are rooted in equity. We use a building dashboard, which we'll discuss in more detail in a later slide, to prioritize buildings with the greatest facilities needs and the greatest concentration of student need. We also considered opportunities to advance BPS's policies initiatives, such as pre-K to 6 to 7 and pre-K to 6 and 7 to 12 grade reconfigurations. Looking ahead, the city and BPS are investing in new foundational tools to inform capital planning and enable us to develop a community-driven master plan by FY25. Using these tools, we will add new projects to the capital plan annually, while existing projects move through the programming, design, and construction phases. Since April, we've been working with Bureau Veritas technical assessment to complete facilities condition assessment, also known as FCA, a detailed objective analysis that produces a larger in-depth data set of building conditions and makes recommendations for repair, replacement, and renovation. This will offer more transparency for communities and inform future capital investment priorities. Once it's complete, the FCA will be integrated into the BPS Asset Essential Management System, which tracks all work orders and capital projects to maintain real-time data on the state of our buildings. And before I pass it over to my partner, Carrie, I just want to let everyone know that I'm joined here by the Deputy Chief of Operations, Teresa F. Webster, our Analytics Manager, Amy Chan, and one of the PMs, Dan Martin, who are part of the operations team. And I'm going to turn it over now to Carrie. Yeah, sorry. I'm going to, let me just switch off.
Okay. So as part of the capital budget, we're going to be doing a K through 6 and a 7 through 12 study. Essentially, this will look at the programming and siting needs throughout the city for every district in the city. And DLR, we are in negotiations now with DLR Design Group, and we'll go in front of the PFC Commission next month, and then we'll be executing a contract to start. We hope to have a robust community process with the school community, family, and alumni of different school districts throughout the city.
Thank you. And then now I'm going to pass it over to Deputy Superintendent Sam Davina.
Thank you, Chief Alvarez. The projects we're proposing focus on 4 areas to provide schools that are safe, healthy, energy efficient, and inspiring for all students. First, constructing new buildings that have enough space for school communities and meet modern educational needs. Second, relatedly, renovating existing buildings to meet modern 21st century educational needs. Aligning with the district policy reducing transitions, reconfiguring schools to the pre-K 6 to 7-12 model where appropriate. And lastly, upgrading the buildings and combining resources for expanding opportunities. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chief Alvarez.
So right now, I'm going to go over the renovations and reconfigurations as quickly as possible. So we're excited to share some detailed information on the major projects we're proposing for FY23 capital plan. Major renovations to the PJ Kennedy and the Cleveland building, which have major building needs. The Urban and the Timothy buildings will be sitting empty at the end of this school year. We're proposing to renovate and reconfigure the Urban as an elementary, and we'll engage with several Rosendale communities and other communities to determine which schools will be moving in. We're also proposing to renovate and reconfigure the Timothy as an elementary swing space, which will facilitate future renovations and new building projects across the district. We're also committing to major renovations to the White Stadium. We'll dedicate $500,000 for assessment of the facilities, including the east and west stands, the playing field, and the track, to develop preliminary designs and cost estimates building on previous 2013 study. BPS and the Parks Department will work together to ensure that facilities meet BPS athletic standards and needs. Slide. We're also excited to initiate several new building projects. We're making commitments to new builds at Madison Park Technical Vocational High School, the McKinley Schools, and the West Roxbury Educational Complex. All of these projects begin with a needs assessment funded in our capital budget proposal for next year. This phase typically lasts at least a year. The assessment will invite student, families, and educators to collaboratively build a vision for their school, what kind of programming they want to see, and what kind of space we need to create to facilitate that kind of programming. The conclusions of these needs assessment will inform the design and then ultimately the construction. We're also proposing major renovations to the Blackstone Elementary School and the addition of auxiliary space at the Otis School. For these two, we're applying for funding from the MSBA. We've already submitted our statement of interest to the MSBA and anticipate hearing back this fall. The King Building is in urgent need of repair, which we'll prioritize with the ongoing facilities condition assessment to determine the best path forward to upgrade the building. We're also proposing new funding to move forward with past commitments. These include a new pre-K to 6 schools in Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan. The school design study, which Terry described, will help us find a location for these 2 new schools, and then we'll use city funds to build new facilities large enough to host multiple school communities. We don't know yet which schools will be invited to move into these new buildings starting in the next school year. We'll be engaging with several school communities in these neighborhoods to map out a plan for which schools, communities will ultimately merge into the new building. We're recommitting to new pre-K 6 school on the Jackson Man campus. The first phase will be a needs assessment and develop a building program for the design and construction of new facilities. This study will evaluate 2 options. Option 1, the elementary school, BCYF Center, and Horace Mann School, all on the same site. And option 2, the elementary school and BCYF Center on the Jackson Man site, and an alternative site in Boston identified for the long-term home of the Horace Mann School. We'll start engaging the Austin Bryan school communities in the next school year to determine which communities will move into the new facilities. Almost done. While we launched the new large-scale capital projects, the city is continuing to invest in initiatives across BPS to improve the safety, quality, and environmental sustainability of facilities. These include installing energy efficiency upgrades in selected school buildings through the Renew Boston Trust, modernizing kitchens across 106 schools, continuing the city's annual schoolyard improvement program, improving exterior grounds at 9 schools, renovating bathrooms across the district, implementing accessibility improvement across the district, improving entryways, and renovating libraries, art rooms, science rooms, and auditorium. Next slide. We'd like to share more information on the tools we've used to inform the FY23 capital plan. I'd like to hand it over to Amy Shan to introduce the BPS Building Dashboard and new tools that we're proud to ensure equity. Sorry, Amy's here already. I'll turn it over to Amy.
Thank you, Chief Alvarez. To help inform longer-term capital planning, BPS Operations developed what we call the Building Dashboard. This is an internal tool that we built in the past year. It integrates various data sets, the SY22 Opportunity Index, capital assets useful life estimates, facilities team evaluation, and environmental audit reports. This dashboard is continually updated by our BPS facilities team. The dashboard is the best information we have to help us prioritize proposals for major new construction and renovation projects based on both the building needs and the students' needs. Our goals in using the dashboard are: 1, to evaluate and prioritize our BPS buildings for funding and renovations in an equitable, holistic way. 2, to provide transparency around facilities data across our district. And 3, to share the operations vision for building prioritization, including the facilities condition assessment that has recently already begun. On our next slide, we'll go through the building dashboard in a bit more detail. So as part of the Mayor's May 12th announcement about the Green New Deal, we released this internal tool for community transparency. It's an important stepping stone towards understanding comprehensive facilities conditions, reflected by a building needs score based on facilities needs, as well as the Opportunity Index for an equity lens. Along with enrollment projects and policy initiatives, the building dashboard is a tool used for capital planning. Other upcoming foundational tools for capital planning include the FCA, as we stated earlier, which is an industry standard detailed assessment. It's also a bit hard to see here, but if you look at the top right screenshot of the building dashboard, you can also check it out online on the website. But 61% of our buildings were built before 1950, and only 8.5% of our buildings were built after 1980. At this point, I will turn it over to Deputy Chief of Operations Teresa Neff Webster to walk through our work with the BPS Facilities Department. Thank you.
Good morning. As Amy said, my name is Teresa Neff Webster. I'm the Deputy Chief of Operations for the district, and I am here on behalf of Brian Ford, who is the Executive Director of Facilities, and he is happily on his honeymoon, so I'll be reading his talking points for him. We are also excited to share the launch of our new work order system, management system, Asset Essentials, which allows us to better receive, process, track, and execute work in the schools. We are also able to analyze the list of work order requests to assess which projects need a district-level push, such as security, parking lot repairs, and painting. Our budget increase to our maintenance lines has helped us to maintain the buildings to a higher standard moving forward, and our structural changes to the overall department and team support in managing more in-house projects. We are working hard to move forward in a more proactive position rather than reactive. And on the next slide, you'll see that since the launch of our Asset Essentials work order management system this January, we have received over 3,700 work orders across the various maintenance categories. Many are alterations and repairs. Facilities is working daily to address these work orders, and we've completed 27% of the work orders since January 2022. And on our final slide, we'll see that 27% equates to 997 work orders completed for school buildings across the city neighborhoods. This is a geographic summary of all the completed work orders, and this is from last week, from January to last week. With that, I will pass it back to Chief Alvarez.
Madam Chair, that is the conclusion of our presentation at this time.
Oh, great. Because I was going to say, y'all out of time.
I heard the alarm.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge that we've been, since then, joined by my council colleague, doesn't matter who came first. My vice chair, council colleague, Brian Worrell, Councilor Kendra Lara, Councilor Julia Mejia, and Councilor Gabriela Coletta. Yep, I got everybody else. For line of questioning, I know that Councilor Murphy has to leave soon, and I think you were first anyway, right? We'll come back to my vice chair, and then after you go, and then we'll go to the line, okay? Councilor Murphy, you have the floor.
Thank you. And thank you for that presentation. First, I do want to shout out the custodians that I worked closely with for decades. They're amazing. And my father always told me a good lesson that when I first started teaching in BPS, make sure you make friends with the custodian and the secretary, and you will be just fine, which I was for 20 plus years. And before I started teaching, actually I would go along with my dad some days, afternoons, because in the 80s he started removing asbestos from the BPS buildings. And we know 30 plus years later, we're still removing asbestos from our buildings. And also want to state how, you know, even though most of my time in BPS, I worked at thriving schools, level 1 schools, long waiting lists, the conditions of the buildings were not great. My kindergarten classroom at the Murphy, at least 2, sometimes 3 times a year, the bathroom above us would crash through and leak onto our rugs. So we were often moving and cleaning, but we kept going and kept making it work, which I know so many teachers and staff in our buildings just make it work. And my classroom at the Henderson had beautiful windows, but they were nailed shut. So we were always really cold and we were always really warm. And I would myself take the grate off of the heater and clean out. There was just, you know, so, but not because the custodians weren't doing their job. We just know that we need to invest in making sure that our buildings are thriving. But I did want to shout out that it didn't stop the teachers from doing amazing work and the families also supporting. And one thing I always tell parents when they're taking a tour of a school, make sure you visit the bathroom and the cafeteria before you leave, because they probably won't bring you there on the tour, and that will tell you a lot about a school. And so that being said, 2 things. I know it's exciting when we talk about money being spent on building new buildings or making investments in older buildings, and wondering about the communication, because families really get connected and staff gets really connected to our buildings. And wondering, I know we talked about the dashboard, so my 2-part question is, what other ways are we going to communicate this with the teachers and the families about which buildings might be closing and which will be staying open? And then my second part is a question I've asked a few times, maybe every time BPS has been in here, is of the 124 or 5 buildings we have, what is the current enrollment? What do we expect it to be in September? And what is the capacity at each building? Because that's really going to drive our conversation with families on temporary closing. We're talking about swing schools and keeping some schools open. So that information I'm going to put on the record for asking again, but the communication question is the one I'd like answered now.
Sure, I'll take that question, Councilor Murphy. So as part of our assessment in restructuring the way we go about the work under the Green New Deal, one of the main areas we talked about and highlighted was around communication with families, stakeholders within each of the schools. And we acknowledge that we have to do more of that work. So what we decided to do was make sure we also added that capacity within the work that we're doing by providing 2 additional staff members. We've outlined and outfitted each of the projects with specific project managers. Dan, who's here, is one of those out of many that we have on staff. So those between the project managers and additional staff for family community engagement, we're going to work on making sure we have frequent contact with the school leaders, the school communities internally as we plan, as well as more publicly with the stakeholders, parents, and students as we go along the way. So we'll be doing more engagement, more involvement, obtaining more feedback through these new systems that we've been able to build. a large part of the problem and what we struggled with was our capacity to actually do some of that engagement, but we think we've resolved it with these investments.
I would like to probably want to defer to Chief Cooter on the enrollment part of the question from the counselor. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, happy to. Our current enrollment as of May was 49,927. Our October projection is for 49,284. The thing to keep in mind when it comes to our enrollment projections is that for planning purposes, we need to project always to what we consider the high water mark, which is for any grade or program, we need to look at how many students do we anticipate to serve at its highest point throughout the year. We know that for special education, for example, particularly early childhood, it's in spring when you see the highest enrollment. Our overall capacity as a district, there's multiple ways to look at it. The thing I'll just note is the decline in enrollment that we've seen over the last 7 years has not led to a lot of empty classrooms because you see the decline spread across.
Yeah.
And
Not to interrupt, but I
Yes.
wasn't talking about overall enrollment specific to the buildings, because I know I brought up how there's more students at the Kilmer, a small elementary school, than there are at Brighton High, which is, so we have some buildings that have many empty schools. So not the overall enrollment, I know that, but I've asked for each individual school, their current enrollment, and then projected, knowing that it may be lower in September.
Yeah, in the responses that we provided to the May 2nd hearing, the city council responses on the enrichment hearing, we provided a table for all of you that has each of the schools, the neighborhood, their current May enrollment, the October 22 projection, and then the anticipated capacity in 22, 23, so that you can see the places where we have the most, what we sometimes refer to as built capacity, that's staffed capacity. It won't tell you necessarily at a place like Brighton, if there are empty classrooms, we don't have a measure for that capacity in this file.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Bach, you can go. Councilor Rowell prefers that you.
Okay, all right. Thanks so much. Thank you all. This is so important, and I was so excited to see the major commitment of funds. And I think to Councilor Murphy's point, I think our families knowing that long-term commitment is there, and like you referenced, being able to know what the plan is and sort of feel like there's confidence in it. And I think that's so critical to rebuilding trust. And so along those lines, what I really wanted to ask is, like, I'm so excited about this, but like, how are we gonna make sure that we actually get it done? I mean, you meant like expeditiously and to budget. I mean, you mentioned this, Chief Irish, like it feels like, especially with the choreography we're setting up of, hoping to create brand new schools that are that high quality school that we can then move people in. There's a lot of trouble if there's slippage, whether we're talking about budget slippage or time slippage. And frankly, historically, we have had that, right? And so I'm wondering, and then I also think, I know that we're gonna have questions about how are we making sure that like our local Boston workforce is getting to work on these schools? How are we making sure that like kind of we've smoothed the way across the board for like execution, like the types of things where you realize you didn't deliberate with the right people and then the whole project gets put on pause at a really belated point is what I think we want to avoid. So just how are we going to have this be different from before in terms of that expeditiousness and kind of like collective coordination?
I'll start, and others may want to join in, but I'll say there's a lot of lessons learned when we look at the past decade that we're going to draw from. And that's why there's this commitment to not just funding BPS and leaving them on their own. This is a real all hands on deck approach, understanding that community engagement is it's going to be one of the most critical things, to include everyone in decisions that sometimes may be tough, but we have to have conversations and have long-term plans. We are working towards having a long-term plan that's perfectly transparent to everyone. Some of the things that are in this budget are investments in the things that we need, in terms of like the studies, for example, will help us to, as a community agree on what type of standards do we have for our schools? What's the design going to look like? What should be in every school building so that when we take on a project, we don't have to spend as much time going forward after we have these tools figuring out those details. We know what size buildings we need. We know what should be in them. And that will be one of the things that will help us to speed up our projects. In terms of keeping things on time and on budget, proud to have Kerry Griffin on the team leading PFD. She does this all day long for every single project that PFD manages, is to work with our project management team and with our contractors, our consultants, to make sure that we're holding them accountable. We're using the best tools that are available. Our eBuilder is one of the tools that we use to track every detail of every project. So I'll ask Kerry just to talk a little bit more about some of those things that we do on a regular basis, but I feel really confident that with the resources that we're giving to BPS and public facilities to make sure that we have that capacity, and with our commitment and our additional resource that we're adding to community engagement at BPS, that things will be much different going forward. Kerry?
Thanks, Chief. Thanks, Chief. And I'll just echo Chief Irish's words. So we are providing, within the department, we have actually a total of 13 new positions, most of them project managers for the capacity, and also, also a scheduler and a training person to help support the department as we grow with the e-builder processes. Everything that we do is tracked through there, so anyone could see the status of it. In terms of, yeah, it's really having the tools and the people in place. So we have been, our financial partners have allowed us to start the hiring process before July 1 so that we can get geared up and ready to go and assign these projects within a couple of months.
If I could just add to that briefly, what's also different and new is that we've created a predictable cycle of engagement in work and monitoring, which I thought was what we thought was lacking previously, where we have an ideation stage where ideas are formulated from either school communities, public first. Then that ideation process, we do a real assessment of, well, what's really possible and not possible. Then we're going to re-engage the community and stakeholders around, well, these are some of the ideas that were presented. Here's what we think is realistic or not, or pros and cons of each scenario. Then we have a space committee now that actually reviews a lot of this information in conjunction with a lot of city partners. And then we bring it back to the community, say we've planned it out, we thought out the concerns in more detail. Here's what we think is possible, and then decisions are made about going forward or not after that. Then we're going to just continuously monitor the implementation of the decision as well. So I think for me, the critical change is the people, the resources, and a predictable process.
I want to add just one more thing. Our state partners, the Mass School Building Authority, we've strengthened our partnership with them. The MSBA has already probably given the city over $200 million in reimbursements in the last 10 years. And one of the goals of our K-6 and 7 to 12 study is that we're also going to be incorporating MSBA standards. So when we submit proposals, they'll be much stronger and with a higher likelihood of getting funded and accepted by the MSBA.
Great, thanks for all that. And when are those K-6 and 7 to 12 studies that'll sort of help us have that kit of parts? When do we think that's going to be done?
I'll take that. So we've done the designer selection, and we're going in front of PFC next month.
Right, you mentioned.
And then we'll hope to have an executed contract by July, August. And then from there, we'll start the process. So we'll start engaging the community.
But what about the other end of the timeline? When do we expect it to be finished?
It's a 12 to 18 month study.
Okay. And in terms of the bird's eye view, that detailed facility study, when do we expect that to be completed?
We have started the process, and that is also about 12 to 18 months to completion. So trying to look at the date, and I will.
So has that started, or is that in the same place as this, of waiting to go through?
It started, and it started already. And I'm going to, do you remember that timeline in terms of what we anticipate the completion, so that the counselor, 12 to 18 months, what's the deadline, what's the last date on that? I don't have the date on my top of my head, but I know that we started the process already, just to give you what month in.
Okay. So basically, we could have so we're thinking that we're gonna have that sense of what a standard school build looks like by July to December of 2024. And we think that this piece we're gonna have by,
Yes, the published report will be done within 18 months. It started last week, the pilot started last week.
18 months from last week.
Correct.
Okay. And I'm asking these timeline questions because to me, it seems really important to this establishing clear expectations for us to be able to print and share with the community as soon as possible a real cascade, right? And like the cascade, as you all know, you're the experts here, is affected by everything else. So I just wanna, and I also think people can be like anxious with things far in the future. My experience of these kinds of like ballets is from the Boston Housing Authority world, and when people know that they're gonna at some point need to move, they get anxious even if the deadline is 5, 6, 7 years in the future. So I just really wanna emphasize that I feel like we need this all to come together into something that's a real transparent schedule for everybody that we can commit to. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Council Bach. Council Braden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here this morning. This is very exciting. I think the Green New Deal, rebuilding Boston, new public schools for Boston is fabulous. I just had a question. The MSBA is a very significant partner in a school rebuilding program. How many projects can we have in the ring at any one time? Like, I understand there's a limit. Like, right now we've got 3 projects. We have a pipeline. We can't just throw a whole lot more projects into the MSBA pipeline just like that because we want to. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, the MSBA is certainly funding projects throughout the state. So, you know, Boston wouldn't be able to just, you know, I don't know if there's a specific cap. I know for this year, we've submitted 2 core projects, which are like major builds and renovations. And we've submitted, I think, 7 accelerated repair projects. The number's correct. And so that's been pretty consistent. We've been getting at least 1 project in. We're hoping to build the capacity in our relationship to get as many as we can, but we understand that some projects are going to be just funded directly by the city, and some projects may be a better fit for the MSBA reimbursement program.
Yeah. And then one issue that came up when we were looking at the Horace Mann submission last year, one of the comments was that an MSBA project, they didn't, and this is me getting into the weeds a little, but they didn't fund spaces in a school building that were not directly educational. So if there was an adult educational program or they were picky about, and in this modern day, if we're spending billions of dollars in school buildings, we better make sure that we're using them 24/7, really year-round facilities that have got community. The hub school idea, which is wonderful, that it's not just for 7 to 3 year, that the school buildings that we're investing so much money in will have other purposes apart from like evening classes and community building and other, just to make sure we're getting the best bang for a buck would be really important. The other question I had was with regard to, we did an inventory, a school building inventory, the condition of our schools in 2015. How is that going to inform the latest, the facility study that we're looking at right now?
So if you're referring to the initial 2017 BuildBPS assessment, that was done in a snapshot in one period of time, and that was never designed to be ongoing and updated. So what we've done now is move to an industry standard of having facilities condition assessment done regularly, and that will continue to happen as we move forward. So that was just a snapshot in time is how I would describe it, but then what we're doing now is talking about we have a data dashboard that gave us our current internal assessment that will continue to update until the facility condition assessment is complete. Then once the facilities condition assessment is complete, then that will drive our work going forward, and that will be constantly updated.
Very good. And then do we have the maintenance staff, do we have our own maintenance staff in-house, or do we contract out all of our maintenance? How does that work?
In-house.
It's in-house. So and then there's an ongoing, like the dashboard's really helping to get up to speed with timely response to maintenance requests.
Sure, let me be more specific. So our custodial staff is in-house, and we have our alterations and repair division staff in-house, but we do have contracts in place to help us outsource some of the work that's done that's more above and beyond what the custodians do. So it's a hybrid of both, but we do have a mechanism now. We've established Asset Essentials, which is our new work order system that's electronic, that folks can put in, and we can track more specifically what's submitted and what's repaired, and we can monitor it more closely. That's something we implemented this year.
And then when we're thinking about rebuilding schools and building new elementary schools, do we have any research on what's an optimal size for a school? Because you know, there's all sorts of opinions, but I really do feel for, especially in the lower grades, that in elementary schools especially, there's an optimal size. If it's too small, then you don't have certain resources that you might want, but if it's too big, then kids get lost in the mix. So what are we building on?
Yeah, that's what the assessment will help us determine. So part of that will include understanding, well, what's the right fit and what ought to happen and be in a K-6 and or 712 for that matter.
Yeah. And then in terms of projected enrollment, one big concern I have about is where we're getting, I think, Nate, we've talked about this, about what we're basing our projected enrollment on. I think the last year's census was, we recognize it's a very significant undercount in the city of Boston, especially in communities of colour, and in Alston Brighton, I think we're reckoning we might be 5,000 people less, and that's a conservative estimate, than are actually there. So how are we adjusting, and who are you working with to make sure we get good projections, and what it's based on?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The census data that we use, including the annual community survey, there's the 10-year census that collects information that I think there's a lot of concerns around undercounting. And then there's an annual survey that we do to get information and look at. We also look at the number of live births, and we had a partnership pre-pandemic with the Boston Planning and Development Agency where we were trying to do some really innovative stuff to be able to look at the mayor's housing plan and the new buildings that were being coming online and the estimated impact on enrollment in future years. But really the biggest indicator that we have of our enrollment for next year is our current enrollment. And so all of those things, we look at community surveys, we look at live births, that's really for us to get a projection of the number of K1 and K2 students, those 4 and 5-year-olds that we're going to serve. But once we have them enrolled in our district, our best indicators are the data that we already have. And so when we look at the long-term projections for first, second, third grade, those are really based on our current enrollment. We don't need anyone else to provide the data. We have the data on every child that's in the city of Boston, what school they're in, what type of school, whether they're BPS or non-BPS.
Thank you. And then in terms of community engagement, you know, you're talking to current, like we're talking about going forward in the future. Are we engaging with future parents? Like, I know, I keep thinking we have a huge number of adults at a certain age that we want them to stay in the city. We want them to be able to afford to live in the city. We want them, their kids, their future kids that may not have arrived yet, to actually go to our schools. How are we going to engage with that population as well as the folks who are, you know, some of these buildings will be built after the current students have graduated and they're long gone from our school system. How are we engaging and marketing our city as a friendly, kid-friendly, great place to raise kids?
Sure. So we're going to be working real closely with our Family Community Engagement Division, who's also part of our cross-functional team, and they will help us with a lot of that work. So we'll pay more closer attention to that particular population, and we have to think that through how we do more engagement there.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Council Braden. Councilor Lujan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to BPS for being here. The presentation was very informative. Also very excited about the Green New Deal for our schools. You know, our school buildings need to really affirm the dignity of all of our students, and too often they're not doing that. I was excited to take a look at the BuildBPS dashboard tool, to see the individualized assessments of the schools and to see the ratings. But could you talk a bit more about how those ratings, like those determinations are made, whether it's something in the school gets the label excellent, good, fair, poor, deficient? Can someone talk to that?
I'm going to ask Amy Shan to come down and give us a presentation how we came about the numbers and how it's categorized.
Thanks, Chief Alvarez. Hey, everyone. Good question. So in the building dashboard that we shared for transparency, we came up with those ratings via a step-by-step process. So first, we looked at the capital asset useful life of all the major infrastructure categories in schools, so everything from the roof, the facade, the boilers, and so forth. Based on that, it set a priority suggestion. Then we went to all our facilities team engineers in planning and engineering, and they validated those, and they could either up it or bump it down in terms of priority level.
Now, are they actually going to the school buildings to make these assessments, to validate, to do the validation?
Oh yeah, they're in the schools all the time. Yep. So we did this last year, and then we also did a refresh of that data this February. And then on top of that, we added in the opportunity index. So it's not just whether a school in a certain location has a bad roof, for example. We also included information on the concentration of the students' needs levels that are served by that school, since we bus students across our district for all the schools.
Thank you. I'm a bit worried about what our baseline is in terms of what we believe each school, the quality of facilities in a school should be. You know, what made me nervous is I went and I looked at some of the schools that I'm familiar with, right? Like my middle school, the McCormick, and I was there recently and looking at the gym, for example, which is listed on the BuildBPS dashboard as being in excellent condition. The air ducts need cleaning, the paint is falling off, right? There's mold in certain parts of the gym. So I am just, you know, as I was excited to explore, but then nervous that the data in a lot of areas may not be accurate based on our understanding and community's understanding of the deficiencies within a school. And so when I saw the gym that needs substantial investment and improvement labeled as excellent, that caused some concern.
So if I can just comment on that briefly. So this internal assessment we conducted with our internal staff to get at least our initial baseline until we can have the facilities condition assessment started and completed. What will be different is that the facilities condition assessment will be done by a third party, neutral party that we've hired, and they'll have an independent look at everything specifically and have those tours with the school leaders, and it'll be more informed. This was just a snapshot for us to at least have a baseline starting point that we'll build upon. Just want to stress that.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And that's why I said I'm a little bit nervous if this is the baseline, because there's a lack of excellence in some of these areas where that we mark as excellent or even sufficient. So when, I think someone asked, but when will there be an update to the dashboard once this independent study is completed?
Yes. Yeah, so we'll continue to update this particular dashboard on a regular annual cycles as the facilities condition assessments rolled out.
But are you using the dashboard and like what's currently existed to make the determinations on what needs to be upgraded at certain schools?
We'll be going, that'll inform part of it, yes. And also the updating of this information will be done in conjunction with the school leaders and further additional tours.
Yeah, I guess I'll just emphasize that it be done in conjunction with school leaders, because you know, this is a school that's expanding, right? But the facility remaining in the same facility, it's merging. They're getting additional high school, but they're in cramped facilities. The lockers are deficient. They don't have, like, there are leaks in the gym. There are things that need to be really rectified for a school that's expanding. And if I'm using this dashboard, I'm a little bit nervous that they're not getting the attention, for example, that they would need. And I'm worried what that looks like for other schools where we're marking things as excellent. Another thing that was mentioned in the Green New Deal for our schools is the upgrade to White Stadium, and we've been receiving a lot of emails and concerns from students who are upset at the condition of White Stadium. And there was a 2013 study done, and now we're talking about money for another study. Did we do anything with the information that was in the 2013 study? Were there any upgrades made then, and why not?
So, no, the assessment was done, but unfortunately, no dollars were committed to actually doing any renovations there. I couldn't speak to specifically why not, but what we do know now is that we've prioritized that as an area because White Stadium, for the longest time since I've been around, has been really neglected. We've done our best to make renovations and repairs as needed, but at this stage of the game, we just think it's best to just have a whole fresh new look at it. And we're thankful that the mayor has committed these resources to White Stadium and the project. So we look forward to working with the Parks Department, the George White Fund, to really take action this time.
Okay, and so what we have committed right now is a study in the capital plan for 1 year, and then going to move that into operating in the following year.
That's right.
And is there a projected budget for that?
Not until the study's complete.
Okay. A little bit of a pivot. Also got a lot of emails and calls this morning about a lot of issues. What are we doing in terms of the timeliness of to improve the timeliness of our buses? A number of parents, a number of students this morning alone have reached out with complaints about their buses not showing up. And it's especially hard for working class families, for all families really, but to manage their day and figure out, what they're gonna do, whether they have to personally drive their student or figure something out. So what are we doing?
Well, thankfully, under Dr. Caselli's leadership, we've have a new bus contract with our CBA for the bus drivers that has finally got us to a place where we have some operational changes within that current agreement. So going forward, we hope to utilize and leverage some of those new things. But as far as right now, we're continuing to make sure we over-communicate with families when there's going to be delays. We're continuously working with our drivers and TransDev, our bus operating company, to make sure we're over-communicating when these instances arise. And really urging parents to make alternative plans where appropriate, because these things, unfortunately, we can't 100% get rid of them for now, but we're working towards that.
Can you go into a little bit more detail about what it means to over-communicate or to communicate with parents? Because oftentimes they're left. Just this morning, the bus just didn't show.
Yeah, so my understanding is that we do a run in the morning and we have an idea of who's absent the morning of, and then once we know that, people at the bus yards as early as 5 a.m. doing that attendance count and run, and we start making calls as soon as we know the whole totality of the driver absences. Communications are going out to parents themselves directly, to schools directly themselves, to people that operate on the ground. And we're looking at really trying to push our hiring right now. So I know the team's actively working on trying to get as many drivers hired right now, working with the RMV to get people certified. So hiring is part of our strategy, and then the communication piece with our families. And in the afternoon, same kind of thing. So if we know the attendance is going to be bad in the afternoon, we're communicating in the afternoon to the same people. So twice a day we're doing communication. And
what is the percentage of buses that just don't show up, or that of the total fleet in a day?
My understanding is about 2%, but we can give you an exact number.
Okay, thank you. I'll reserve the rest of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lujan. Council President Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panelists for being here and the work you're providing the residents of the city. Just want to highlight the professional work Public Facilities has been doing. I want to thank the director, Kerry Griffin, as well. So my comments are similar to my colleague, Councilor Lujan, as it relates to HVAC systems, swimming pools, and athletic facilities. As we end a school year, and with the hot temperature now, are all our schools right now, do they have adequate air condition, and is it working as it should, or are we still waiting to do major renovations to improve HVAC systems? And good to see you, Superintendent.
So we're currently in the process of converting over RACs to put them on and working and operable. So that's ongoing. That's a regular cycle that we do year to year. And part of that work is to make sure that the systems are working and functioning and doing any repairs that are necessary to do that. Simultaneously, we have started the installation of the ACs in the classrooms that Dr. Caselli has helped us implement. So we're in the process of doing that now.
For the pools, that is, we work with our partners at BCYF in terms of maintenance of our pools, and they're preparing that as well for the summer months.
Yeah, I focus a lot on the swimming pools for several reasons, but, the partnership between BCYF and BPS has to be excellent for a swimming program to function effectively. Swimming plays a critical role for many. We live in a city that's right in the ocean, but I also know, and it's an issue I've worked on for 5 years, I also know that students of color and immigrant students especially as well, students with disabilities, I don't think they get the necessary swimming lessons in school. And I've worked on this issue and asked the YMCA to be involved with BPS, with BCYF. That's why I want swimming pools fixed. And I think it's critical that we fix swimming pools. But are there still swimming pools that are not working?
I'd have to get the exact information. My understanding is what we work with the City Department ISD, and they do an annual inspection of all the pools, and based on those inspections, we make the necessary repairs. But I'd like to get back to you with that specific information.
Okay, this is one of my top priorities, is the swimming pools. And I think it's critical. We're going into the summertime. Kids are not going to be in school, and they're going to be in and around the ocean. That's why it's critical to fix swimming pools and get kids swimming lessons. So I've stressed this as a priority for me, that I want to get swimming pools fixed, and I want to get kids swimming lessons, kids with disabilities and students of color. And is this a priority for BPS? It's certainly my priority, but is it a priority for BPS?
Yes. So coming out of the pandemic, we had to unfortunately shut pools down. So I know at that time when we were opening school this past year, we worked really closely to do those pool assessments and get them up and running and operable again. So it is a priority for us, and I know our team has been working in collaboration with the community centers and the Y and talking about swimming and programming and bringing in other partners on board. Commissioner Rivera and I meet weekly to go over the tenets of our MOU and to make sure our teams are talking and working together. But we can definitely put a sharper focus on swimming pools and programming.
Okay, could I get an update on the status of swimming pools and what issues we have remaining? I want to make sure that we're making steady progress on it. I understand they're not all fixed, but I want us to make steady progress, and I really want to see this finished by the end of the summer. Is that realistic to have all the swimming pools fixed by the end of the summer?
I'd love to get the status update first, just to let you know where we are, where we stand, because they may very well be all up and operable now. I just want to just give you that most accurate information as possible.
Okay. What are the major problems we have with athletic facilities in BPS, in our gyms, in our sports parks and playgrounds, or where our kids play ball? What are some of the challenges we have?
Yeah, definitely not enough of them. So I think what we do prior to every season is we do a facilities assessment to ensure that where the kids are playing have everything they need. Typically when the weather's bad, snow or rain, it tends to damage our fields that are grass and natural fields, but then we have a system in place, we work to make those repairs. So it's an ongoing assessment, and we'll continue to make necessary repairs if there's a deficiency in any of the areas.
Do we have a list of outstanding BPS facilities, athletic facilities that are not in compliance, that need significant infrastructure improvements to them?
We'll be doing that assessment for the upcoming year now. So the spring season is winding down as we speak. So the sports season is pretty much concluded, but typically this is the time of year where we have schools in our athletic department go out and assess the conditions of the field, and they'll have that report, and we work on that over the summer to get ready for the fall season.
Yeah, but Sam, that's too late. It's June now, and going into July and in August, the kids are going back to school in late August, September. We need to be working on this now, not doing assessments now. We need to have making infrastructure improvements now. So so that there are no delays.
So as I said, the season's over. We're working on those right now. So any repairs that are needed will happen in the moment, but this is the time where we do the repairs.
We will also add to the request that you have, Counselor, around pools, we're going to add like an update on the athletics.
Okay, yeah, those are important issues. We need to give our students the opportunity to swim, to play sports, to study in a healthy environment with the HVAC system. Those are priorities that I have. I just also hope these are priorities for BPS as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Council President Friend. Council Lara, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the administration at BPS for coming to be here today. It's good to see you all again. So I have questions that are specific to the presentation. On the presentation, there was a mention of a community-driven master plan for FY25. Can you talk a little bit about what that's going to look like? And most of my questions are along this community engagement piece, so.
Sure. So we've started some recent conversations with the community around more the K-6, 7, 12 alignment that we've been talking about and moving towards. Yep. And we started with initial individual school-based meetings, and then we've moved to engage more of the community. And our plan is to, as the study is complete and as we get into more of the review of the data, figure out where we make some additional recommendations for the community and get their feedback on what they'd like to see as well. What we've heard continuously is that sometimes the community wants to give us the feedback and give us the ideas, so we've built in some time going forward for that to actually happen. We're not at the stage to roll any of that out now because we're focusing on the current proposals around the mergers that we're proposing and getting feedback on. And then going forward, our plan is to have the different PMs for the different projects and neighborhoods, as well as our family community engagement division, help us chart out what those engagement sessions will look like, and keep the community informed and updated on the progress of all the work.
So in that vein, in the presentation under the facilities quality guarantee, you stated that you would finalize a grade reconfiguration of all the remaining schools pre-K to 6 and 7 to 12 model. Does that mean that you're going to have a finished plan that parents and community members can reference in terms of what schools are merging, which ones are closing?
Eventually, that's the goal, yes, but with additional engagement first.
Timeline?
Yeah, to be determined in the near future as we roll out this wave of work as well. So we're still, because we just started this work, we started some community roundtables about getting feedback on how we do the work. So now that we're still getting feedback on how to approach the work is how I describe it now. And once we have that nailed down, then we'll roll out a more comprehensive plan with timelines.
Okay, and so along the community engagement piece, at what point and in what ways, if you know so far, is the Green New Deal initiative going to involve stakeholders for BPS? Are parents, students, and community members going to be engaged throughout the different stages of the decision-making process? There's just a history, particularly with parents and community members feeling like BPS is presenting them already finished plans that they can respond to. And so we're going to have, new superintendent, we have a new mayor, and so we're hoping that we're not making some of the same missteps. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, we're working closely with our school committee. We're working closely with the mayor's office, working closely with Chief Commissioner Irish and his team to make sure that we have plans in place and a foundation laid on how we move forward. So as the transition occurs, it's going to be important for us at all the different levels I've mentioned to make sure that there's constant communication and constant planning and, more importantly, constant engagement with the community to keep everyone updated. I thought the mayor was fabulous in doing the launch, fabulous in pushing us to make sure we start engagement now, and really setting the tone for how this will go forward. So I think the team has responded, and we're ready to continue that engagement and transparency.
Okay, I appreciate the intention. Is there a plan? I mean, just even for the Green New Deal, and I understand that it was under wraps and the level of secrecy because it wasn't announced yet, but even for the plan that's already been laid out, there was very little community engagement. And so I'm curious of how do you see that intention translating into community?
So I would phrase I'll respond by saying that the planning that went into the announcement was built upon a lot of previous engagement that had already occurred. So for example, I'll speak to White Stadium. People have talked about White Stadium ad nauseum, about what's needed at White Stadium. People have talked about Blackstone, for example, about what's needed at the Blackstone. People have talked about the McKinley schools and what's needed at the McKinley schools. So we took all that feedback
So
to
the
formulate.
Green New Deal for BPS is in a response to community feedback that you've already received
Exactly.
before. Like there's already been engagement previous to that. Okay.
So can I just add to
Please.
that, Counselor, that we're also invested in the FCA to give us data to help us do that master plan as
Okay.
well. So that is really going to help us inform in terms of making sure that we have the right master plan.
Okay, that's perfect segue, because I want to talk a little bit about the dashboard. So this is a budget hearing. And so I'm curious, do you have any information on how, making sure that the dashboard's going to be updated regularly, and what's the expectation? Do you have staffing for it? Is there money, like how do you intend to make sure? I know you talked a little bit about the one-time static report that you did, how the facilities overview assessment is now going to happen on a regular basis, but will the dashboard be updated as the assessment happens, or on a different timeline, and who's going to be doing that?
Simultaneously. So our team will be out reviewing everything that's in the dashboard, talking with school leaders, community members about what's in the dashboard, and just making sure we have a common understanding of what that looks like in picture. And then the facilities condition assessment will give us that third-party neutral view of all the details as well, just to kind of verify and/or upgrade our work towards the broader facilities planning.
Okay. I'm assuming that you came down to also answer part of the question?
Yeah. Just
Okay.
stay there. She's going to stay sitting here for
Okay.
I'll just be here in case.
Yeah,
Sam got
please.
it. Thank you.
Okay. Madam Chair, how much time do I have? Thank you. My next question about the dashboard is, we've heard that there's a possible vulnerable schools list. Does a list of that exist? If, in the interest of transparency, can we?
I apologize. Can you rephrase the question? Can you repeat the question?
There's been some talk about a list of vulnerable schools in terms of the shutdown, and looking at schools that might be shut down, whether based on enrollment or somehow so forth. This is something that's come to me from community members. I don't know that it exists. So the question is, one, does that list exist? And, okay, beautiful, that list does not exist. Can we talk a little bit about including this master plan? So I just asked the question specifically about having the full reconfiguration finished. Will that full reconfiguration be available on the dashboard for people to look at?
So I'm hoping that Amy could go into what would happen with the FCA at the end of completion. At the end of it, there is going to be a public-facing dashboard that anyone could go in and investigate what's going on with the schools and what's the status of the school buildings. And I don't know if I missed anything in that process. I know I'm looking at Amy.
And will you have facilities work broken down by neighborhood as well on the dashboard?
Say it again?
Will you have facilities work broken down by neighborhood on the
Yes,
dashboard?
Counselor.
Beautiful, thank you. And my last question is, part of the goal of the Green New Deal for BPS turning every school into a hub school ultimately?
We do have a hub school strategy that we are working on in the district now, and we're looking to continue to push that model. So that will be one of the lenses that inform some of the work that we do going forward.
But not all schools, it's not gonna be like a full hub school model?
It would require more planning, more conversation, and more investments that I don't think we're ready to talk about right now specifically, but the goal is to have the pilot going now, learn from the pilot, and see how we can expand it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Can I just add,
Yep.
Councilor Lara, 2 projects that we're working on that are meant to inform that kind of question is the K-6 study is going to lay out what our school building design will be. And I think that'll answer some questions about what does the facility need to have, or what are the opportunities for community integration. The second thing is we are launching, and there's multiple conversations that sort of relate to the Reimagine School Funding Project, where we're going to be looking at how we fund our schools. The question of how big our elementary schools should be and what they should have is both a facilities question, but it's an investment and resource question. I think the hub school piece that Sam mentioned has both a staffing component, partnership component, and then also a facilities component. And so it's the integration of those 2 big projects that we hope will paint the picture for the community, and will be informed by community feedback about what do we want our schools to have from operating resources and also facilities resource.
And my time is done, but I didn't hear an answer to the question. Do you have staffing in this budget to manage the dashboard? Like, is it reflective here to have the people to
Okay.
Yes.
Our internal staff
Yes.
managing, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to you all for being here. I just have I want to follow the thread around community engagement just a little bit longer, if you don't mind. Can you just tell me how many sessions you have slated for community engagement specifically?
I'd have to get back to you with the exact number, sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, as part of the K through 6 and 7 through 12, we have about 146 meetings in total. So there'll be visioning sessions with various stakeholders. There'll be focus groups. So the focus is there'll be a lot of community engagement. We'll probably set it up till we'll develop almost like a CAC so that we can have people throughout the district.
Can you explain to us what a CAC is, please?
Sure. People, the school community puts forward certain leaders. They're the representative for that community. We've done it successfully with the Dorchester Community Center study and some other studies that we do when you have such a large, vast number, because there is going to be a commitment that is necessary for so that we receive the engagement of the community. And not everyone can make it at all times, but we do want to, there'll be, and how that's established, we'll be working through that now in terms of with our designer and our community engagement specialist and with a BPS communications team, but the study itself will have a robust community process that will make sure, we engage everyone.
Can I get you the exact numbers of the ones we're doing now on the mergers? That'll be separate, above and beyond this.
Mm-hmm. Can you define for us what you are considering a stakeholder?
Stakeholder is really everyone that has the seat at the table, whether it's the parent, whether it's the administrator, the principal, the superintendent, central office, mayor's team. It's really everyone. The children, we want to have a very transparent and robust process for community, family members. Like all of that increases the value of and will help with the end result.
And can you just explain to us how, with that level of different types of understandings and ages, kind of what your communication engagement process is going to look like so that you are able to reach different age levels, different understandings, have you guys given some thought to that?
We have. We've done most of what we do, even especially with the MSBA, we do a robust community process this is going to be greater because it's district-wide, but when we do community engagement with a school, say like the Carter School, we have a series of, it's part of the process. So we would have essentially a series of visioning sessions that have come from, school professionals, school alumni, school teachers, school admin, families, and, when we work with them. And there'll be different, for the way this will be set up is there'll be an educational component, then there'll be a programming, then there'll be some, there's multiple things. And it will be completely open to anyone that wants to come, but it will be well circulated throughout the city in terms of those session times.
Got it. I just kind of want to note that, we talk a lot about community engagement, and as a parent, I feel like we always have an issue with communication and community engagement, and I really do appreciate the thoroughness in terms of how we're going to repair the harm. But I do know that no matter how robust the plan is, I think where we need to work a little bit more on is the implementation of that plan. I think executing it. I'm going to go on to my other questions, so I don't want to waste all of my time with this. Can you just talk to us a little bit about the efforts around minority vendors and kind of like looking at your facilities and, what are your goals and objectives in terms of like increasing the number of vendors that are minority owned?
So we'll follow the process that we have outlined around attracting them, making sure the language is in every RP that we put out there. We're seeking to do that. We're looking at doing targeted outreach to different vendors that may be able to qualify to do some of the work, and definitely invite them to participate. Yeah.
Sorry, we work with the economic development here in City Hall as well to make sure that we're targeting.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm getting sick
We
or
can't hear
something.
you.
I can't hear
sorry.
people.
My voice.
It's okay, don't worry. I think I got it. You guys are working with some people, right?
Yes.
Okay. You're working with some people. I'd like to know who those people are, and I'd like a list of who they are and the efforts that are being made.
Yep.
And I think timelines, deadlines, goals, and objectives would be really helpful. I'm just gonna ask, I'm just curious about the Shaw, the situation. I understand that the Irving is expanding to the 6th grade, and the Shaw, is that, can you give me some clarity around that?
The Irving is a middle school that's closing at the end of this school year. The Sumner and the Philbrook are adding 6th grade for the fall. Those are in Roslindale, as well as some other Roslindale schools. The PA Shaw is currently a K-3, and will be expanding to 4th grade next year. And we're in, there are multiple things that are going on to engage with the community and make plans for eventually that school matching the K-6 configuration of the district.
Thank you for that. And then I'm just going to note for the record, right? We talk about assessments and studies, and I think, you know, we should really accelerate these studies and start executing against those deliverables. The fact that White Stadium, there was a study done in 2013, and now we're going back instead of moving forward with kind of like moving the work is alarming. And I also think that, to Councilor Louis-Jean's point in regards to how we're measuring standards, you know, I was at the Boston Day and Evening Academy. They're sharing space right now at the Timothy. They're feeling displaced, unhoused, right? Like a lot of the trauma that people who experience housing instability is the same thing in our schools, right? We have this particular situation where they're in 2 different buildings. I went to the Timothy last week, and the floors were literally broken. And so I don't see them on the list here, so I'm just curious about, where does BDA stand in your BuildBPS? Are they gonna have a permanent home? And if so, what does that look like?
Sure. So over the last couple of weeks, we've connected with the head of the school, the representative of their board. We walked through how they're going to be stabilized for next year and what spaces they'll use at the Timothy. And as part of the next wave of discussions around the Green New Deal, they'll be in the conversation about what we do as far as permanent housing, permanent building and structure going forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Clutter, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here. I look forward to working with you all. I was also pleased to see Mayor Wu's commitment to a Green New Deal for BPS. I've said ad nauseum that my district is going to be hit first and worst by negative impacts of climate change. So approaching our capital planning within that lens of resiliency and equity is very important to me. So in that spirit of urgency, I'm going to approach my line of questioning within those lens. And I'll start district specific and then go to general questions the second round. And these are hyper specific, so I get that you probably don't have answers to this right now, but I would love information or any type of follow-up on them. But my first priority is the O'Donnell School Playground in East Boston. I'm sure you all have heard about this, but I'm uplifting and elevating work done by parents and teachers. It was built in 1995. It was torn down. There were 2 incidents where kids were hurt using the play structure. They're okay, and like I said, the playground has been torn down. But when we're talking about high opportunity index schools, this is #1 in my district. I think, just looking at the data, making sure I have it right now, it's 88% of families identify as Latinx or Hispanic. There's been 25 new families that have joined the school community since November. So Amy, I know your dashboard, Amy, right? Did I get your name right? Okay, just want to make sure. Dashboard is incredible. This is one of those instances where I think there might have been a mistake. It was listed as low priority. And when we're talking about, like I said, equity, this is in the middle of a heat island in East Boston. These kids don't have backyards. They largely live in overcrowding in their homes. So I would like to see this as a priority in the capital planning process. And I don't know if there's been any updates on this, or if I can see any sort of commitment or hear any sort of commitment right now that this will be a priority in this budget.
So I would answer your question by bringing it back globally beyond East Boston for a second, and then we can speak specifically back to the O'Donnell. So in doing our assessment, we typically annually make repairs at playgrounds across the district where needed, and when there's emergencies or when there's any malfunctions in systems or structures of playgrounds. So as we did our district-wide initiative and assessment, we compared the O'Donnell playground to others, and when the play structure was up and operable, it wasn't as bad as other playgrounds that are in the district that we continue to make repairs on as needed. So I just want to name that publicly. But as far as the O'Donnell goes, I know the community advocated to just tear it down, so we obliged and we did tear it down. So the big question becomes now is how quickly we can get that playground and or others that are in worse shape rebuilt as well. So I don't want to pigeonhole us just into the O'Donnell, but it is on our focus, it's on our radar screen. We'll continue to make sure that as we talk about playgrounds across the city, we make the investments where we feel is really equitable and not where sometimes the loudest voices are occurring to get demand action. So we really ought to balance both of those pieces.
100%, I understand that. And resources, there's finite amount of resources, right? But in my district, I'm just letting you all know this is my top priority.
Appreciate that.
And it's not just because the parents are loud, it's because of the school population.
Appreciate that.
So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Just to add, the fact that the playground was removed, and this is one of those things for the dashboard that we need to do better, right? It put it at low priority because it's not there right now.
Sorry?
Because the playground is no longer there.
Okay.
It put it at low priority. Doesn't mean that they don't need a playground. It doesn't mean that we're not including them as part of the playground reconfiguration and renewal. It's just that it's not there, and that's how our internal dashboard sees it. But it is definitely a priority for us as well.
Okay. Yeah, we had secured funding for the study, so the study is already done. So I would like to see something in this budget or next budget.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. The Umana Barnes Middle School, my alma mater, it sits on the coastline, and just like this building, it's in the brutalist architecture. Seawater, concrete, not great. I know that they have had money set aside to build some sort of turf around it, just making sure that it is resilient from sea level rise. I don't know if that's been approved yet, but that is something that's in the pipeline.
We can take a look.
Yeah, I don't have that update for you right now, but we'll definitely look at it.
Okay, thank you. Sticking with East Boston, HVAC systems. So East Boston, as you all know, is in the flight path. We breathe ultrafine particulates on a daily basis. I support Mothers Out Front East Boston to have Austin Air HEPA filters in classrooms, especially underneath the flight path. I could point to one school in particular, the Patrick Kennedy, is within a high opportunity zone. So I would like to know if there's any commitment to work with Mothers Out Front or professors at Olin College to get some of these filters in the classroom, and also make sure that we have some data tracking systems to monitor the air quality.
Sure. So we met with those groups previously as we began installing filters across the system. And part of the challenge there was needing to follow 30B purchasing requirements around our filters and how that is done. And
what was it, 30?
Massachusetts General Laws 30B is our procurement laws that we have to abide by as far as making large purchases.
Yep.
So we wanted to make sure that we explained that to them, and we were sensitive to the air quality in East Boston in general because of the conditions and locations, but more specifically due to COVID and making sure there was air exchanges as well happening within the building and spaces. So what that boiled down to was we couldn't use a specific brand. We had to like literally go out to bid and have a whole procurement methodology around that. So that's why we went with the filters that we purchased, because we can't just, a company can't just say, here, use this type specifically. It has to be publicly bid, and we have to follow that process. But we did work with them.
Just a quick reminder, sorry, that everyone's speaking to the mic. We're having a hard time hearing.
Sorry. So that's one of the reasons why we didn't specifically use that filter, because we had to go through a public process, a bidding process for that.
I understand. I don't know, if our academic partners are telling us that there are certain filters that are better than others, I don't know why we would not go with the Austin Air filters, right? I mean, air quality due to COVID, we all know is top priority, especially in East Boston. So I don't know if we can revisit that decision because they are proven to be the best air filters.
We'll be going back to our environmental team within the facilities department, and then definitely have them look at that and see if whether or not we could incorporate what you've just recommended, Counselor.
Thank you, I
But
appreciate
we will
that.
bring it back to the facilities team.
Awesome. And then, I have so many questions, but the last one, I think, how much time do I have?
8 seconds.
8 seconds. 189 Parish Street, any update within 6 seconds?
Planning on going forward with new construction?
When?
That's
No, we put it in as
Oh, yeah, the design,
an Otis annex for, in the MSBA. That's one of the core submissions, that and the Blackstone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Rowe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panel for all the great work you do here in the city of Boston. When I was taking a look at the facilities quality guarantee, when we're talking about buildings, I like to use words like durable, long-standing, but I didn't see any mention of that in the facilities quality guarantee. So it kind of led me to the question of, when we talk about standard new buildings, how are we considering the building materials that we're using? Are we using the high-quality materials or the most cost-effective materials?
I would say we use high quality for long lasting durability and resiliency when we build.
And when we're going to be building the new build, can we get like a list of the materials that we would be using in these new builds?
We'll be developing a set of standards. So you'll have a standards for what type of anything, how we build it in terms of the type of locker, the type of whether the type of flooring, hardware. We'll have a set of standards that will be part of this study, so that which will help the process. So now that you don't, we can just give that to the next design team and say, look, this is the standards that we built to. So that will be incorporated as part of this study.
Perfect. And then after the independent study is done on the facilities assessments, I know you kept on saying regularly, but can you talk to me about what time frame is regularly? Is annually, quarterly, every 2 years? Like how often is regularly?
I'm going to have Amy go into it, but it's annually. Once it's completed, it's an annual upgrade.
Awesome. And then in terms of the assessment report, will there be pictures that's taken up in the facilities? Can you tell me what this assessment report looks like?
So the assessment report would include pictures. They're going into each and every room, taking square footage of all the rooms, all of the systems, understanding what it is, how much life we still have on it. We're putting a tag on it that we could, monitor it on a regular basis. So we're literally going into every single, from the floor to the ceiling, to the systems, to the rooms, bathrooms, all of it, to just really understand in detail the conditions and how much life we have in them. And all of that information will be available in our dashboard that you can go into and look at.
And to your point around durability and longevity, that will help answer those questions. So it'll be live. People can see, well, this boiler was put in 2022. It needs to be replaced in 2025 or whatever the date is.
Awesome. And then how are we making sure that our school buildings are being brought into compliance with BERDO 2.0?
Can you repeat that last part?
BERDO 2.0, our school buildings being brought into compliance?
So that BERDO too, that's more for emissions, and the goal is for 2030, and it actually now includes municipal buildings. So we do look at that. Like any of our new schools that we build will be with net zero guidelines, the ordinance for that, but also BERDO 2.0. So that will impact this year's capital plan in terms of that will be the design. Those will be the standards that are given to designers to say we have to meet these. Like everything we do, we want to look towards the future.
All right. And then my other two questions is me advocating for a study to be done for a new Mattapan High School. So how is the student population factor into where new schools will be built? And do we have a student breakdown by neighborhood? And then, before you go, Nate, and then after you answer all that, do you see the demand for Mattapan High School?
When we looked at identified the sites that were prioritized for the next round of buildings, it was a combination of sites where we had few access or less access to schools close to home, which is why we identified the Mattapan-Dorchester border as one of the priority neighborhoods. And then we also identified places where we knew to achieve our configuration of K-6, 7 to 12, we needed new school buildings. It was what led to both the identification of Roxbury and that area. We do have neighborhood-based enrollment data. The thing that makes high schools tricky is, as citywide high schools, we need to think about our portfolio of high schools both in geographic distribution and then also in programmatic distribution. So where does it make sense geographically for a school program to operate, and then also where are our students? And so the other piece I'll just add when it comes to high schools is right now we have a lot of small high schools and high school enrollment is declining. And so we need to figure out, it's more likely that if we want a high school in Mattapan, then we need to consider what high school will move there, or multiple high schools would move and sort of combine into that neighborhood. We don't have any evidence to suggest that if we opened a brand new high school that we would be able to both sustain that high school and sustain other high schools throughout the city. And so it's part of our high school redesign that we need to look at our overall portfolio and make that determination.
And in terms of student population, is Mattapan top 3, 5? Where does it place in terms of student population?
I can...
Or you can share with me.
Yeah, I'll send you the data. I don't want to speak, I don't have it open right in front of me. I can get it open and answer more questions neighborhood-based, but we can certainly send over the enrollment by neighborhood and the grade bands that we sort of look at to sort of estimate whole. So it'd be 9 through 12, 6 through 8, and then K to 5 is sort of our grade spans that we tend to look at, some version of that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Rowe. Councilor Baker, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everybody. How are you today? Good. Sam, you had talked about we've got a new first of all, what is the transportation budget this year for buses?
Just over 100, just over 100 million.
Over by 30 million, over by 5 million?
I can pull up the exact number for the transportation budget while you...
Okay. And you had said, we had talked about, you had talked about a new contract, and so in hoping that the new contract will allow us to be more efficient. What's in that new contract that is now going to make it more efficient?
Sure.
Is there anything particular in there that?
Yeah, a lot of operational efficiencies as far as bus drivers reporting and time off and those kind of things that kind of contributed to some of what we see now have been addressed in that contract. And those operational efficiencies will help us along the line because it'll be more predictable of when people will be absent, predictable of how we make backup plans, and those kind of pieces.
Okay. Sam, you had also mentioned hub schools. Can you explain a hub school to me? What's the definition of a hub school?
Sure.
What are we looking to do there?
Yeah, hub school basically is a school where it really is welcoming of the whole community and has community partners invested in working in the school to provide wraparound care and support for the families and students that work in the school. So they tend to have a lot of partners that come in to provide different services for students.
Partners that come in or adjacent?
In the local community.
Boys and girls clubs or things like that?
Exactly, YMCA, et cetera, and health services, health-related fields, and they really come in and they map out a plan on how they can support students in the schools, making sure they're meeting academic needs as well as their personal, social, emotional needs as well.
So have you seen the plan for the field house in Columbia Point next to McCormick?
I've heard about it, yes.
Would that be a good model for a hub school? Would that provide wraparound services before school, after school?
It could participate and contribute to a hub school model, yes.
And you haven't seen the plan at all?
For the
field house?
Well, I've been in touch with Bob Scannell and his team, and our team is working closely with them on the rebuilding of the site and the program. And we just had a conversation about the MOU and what that looks like. So I know the school is in conversations with working with them more collaboratively going forward.
In the concern that I had there, and Councilor Louisiane touched on it a little bit, was we're going to turn that 7 to 12. And there hasn't really been anything done on the school to accommodate high school kids, unless there has been. Can you talk about any improvements there that will accommodate high school kids?
Yeah, my understanding is that we're working on the science labs over there. We're doing a lot of investments there. Yeah.
We're doing phase 1, but we don't have the complete update on it, but we are on we're talking about McCormick. Yes. We are completed and track to complete phase 1, which is the science room.
Right.
But there is conversations that we will continue in terms of phase 2 and beyond.
Was there a plan, Indy, was there a plan for an addition on that school?
There was conversations about that.
Yeah, so we only got into conversation. And what happened to that? Because I think realistically, to make that a high school, Sam, to make that high school ready, I think we need to do more than a science lab.
Yeah, there are more work in design happening with the design team and the school principal herself. Part of the challenges of building out and expanding on that property is, if you recall, you think of it as a U, and then in that U area is where a lot of the bus drop-off and pickups occur. So if you build into that area, it creates other operational challenges that may not be helpful. And then,
but I think a bus turnaround for, well, I won't get into the minutia. I think the buses can be on Mount Vernon Street, not even coming to the property.
We do have a vendor that is working on phase 2 and the options for the schools.
Okay, so to move on from this, I think the McCormick needs a real look at if that's gonna be a high school. I think we should be serious about this field house, we being the school department, because it's one of the few, I think it's a really good project. And I think that we're looking at it and poo-pooing it because it's not of our doing. Not our doing, not of your doing. But I mean, it's gonna deliver something that we are unable to deliver. Let me change the subject. Can you talk about, Carrie, how are you today?
Good.
Good. Can you talk about the Dorchester Community Center study? How long was that? Where were the sites we're looking at? And what are we settling on? Like, what is this, have we settled on a site? And I want to do this to kind of lay out how long it takes the city to plan and execute something that like we need yesterday.
So we will be concluding that study in the next month, in June. We did about 6 community meetings. We'll have 1 more to wrap up, and we're going to be providing the mayor's team a suitability matrix, which basically will list the pros and cons based on adjacencies, demographics. So that will be given, and I'm happy to share it with yourself.
How many sites have we been talking about, Kerry?
We looked at, we test fitted, and basically that's just a massing exercise on the site. The ideal community center is about 49 to 65,000 square feet. And so we looked at sites, target those. We looked at 5 sites. We looked at Victory Road. We looked at by the MDC rink off of Morrissey. We looked at Grove Hall. We looked at 4048 Geneva. We looked at the Frederickson behind that building, and that's where we did the test fits. But we also looked at
the Frederickson, the Lila Fredericks.
Correct.
Up on Columbia
And we
Road.
also looked at a lot of private-owned sites, but we didn't approach anyone if there's some interest. Another one that we looked at is Townfield. So we looked at state and city-owned property, and obviously this, it's that square footage, there's not a lot of property within that area, but we did find some suitable parcels. So once we provide, then we'll provide this information to the mayor's team to decide which is the best location.
And how long have we been looking at this, Kerry?
We started this in August of last year, so we'll finish it up in June. But there is money in the capital plan for a standalone in Dorchester.
But if you started it in August of last year, it was a year before that the talks were happening on it?
I'm not sure, Counselor, but I didn't.
Yeah.
Right.
We can leave it there.
Okay.
That's good. Hub schools we get into. Vulnerable schools. Kendra had mentioned vulnerable schools. Do we have a schedule of what, this is probably for you, Nate, what could be closing, what would be closing? We have a declining student population. What does the future look like for us? Like, we're talking about a Green New Deal, and that's great. I really have no idea what it talks about, $2 billion going towards what? Because I know we have deferred maintenance up around $500 million. So is that Green New Deal gonna speak to our deferred maintenance that we have first? And vulnerable schools, if we could, maybe if you could get me a schedule, Nate, of what it's gonna look like, what is potentially gonna close, and that's also merging going up to 7 to 12, and then the kindergarten through 6. Is that what the schedule is? And within there, we'll see the vulnerable schools? And vulnerable meaning schools that are going to close or may close. I'm good, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Do you want to get that to me offline?
Sorry, we don't have a list of vulnerable schools in the way that it sounds like you're talking about. We don't have a list of, there are multiple ways that we could think about putting together that list, but we, both as a community and as a district, don't have that list. There's a list of schools that are receiving significant supplements through soft landings. It's part of our funding. You could look to that list and they say those are some of the more vulnerable schools from a financial perspective. They're the schools that are small and can't operate robust programs.
How is a school vulnerable financially
Counselor
if
Baker?
we're
Counselor Baker,
if we're funding them? I just don't get it.
if you'd like to send information, or round 2, please,
Yeah.
Counselor Baker, thank you. It looks like we're close in time, so round 2, to answer some of my colleagues' questions, round 2 will be possibly just 6 to 7 minutes, including public testimony. If speaking of what Council Baker was talking about in terms of vulnerability schools, or what Council Lar brought up first, do you have demographics or, by race or neighborhoods and for students for each school? Do you have that breakdown?
Yes.
Okay. And then do you have the breakdown of performance by each school and by student?
MCAS performance?
MCAS performance grades? Is that a no?
We have MCAS performance data that we can
That's
provide.
it? Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit of the people who would answer the questions are Office of Data and Accountability. They have multiple measures for schools in terms of schools with low attendance or schools with...
They can answer it?
Yeah, if you have a series of questions by school, we can...
And real specifically what you're looking for, exactly.
Okay, then I can submit that by email. So you see where I'm getting at? We would know what this list looked like, the vulnerable schools, if we actually did an assessment. If we actually said, these are the schools where kids are dropping out, these are where they're performing and not performing, MCAS, demographics, neighborhood, right? By determining, also relating that to social determinants of health, students that are homeless, students that are in counseling, students that are facing more issues than other students. If we did that assessment, we would have this list, right? Then we would know where we school more vulnerable populations. Do we know that? If we don't, that's okay. I just want to get to a point.
No, we do, and I think as part of the building dashboard, part of that is the inclusion of the opportunity index, which is one of our comprehensive measures of need for individual students in schools. I think there are multiple ways that we can assemble data across a number of different fronts, and then the weighting of those criteria would tell us sort of what schools we want to prioritize for expansion. I think that needs to be a transparent and community-based process that we haven't had in quite some time. So we don't have an internal list that would say these are the schools that we think should close or these are the schools that should expand, because that would be information that we should make public. and then operate from there. But
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is, like, for example, if the reason why.
I'm sorry, could I just keep
Sure.
going, because I'm also timed?
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm going to submit these list of questions by email, if it's okay with you?
Okay.
And then we can get to it, so I can have a better understanding. You know how in the budget book, the mayor's capital plan, there are a list, you can go in the book and there's a list of schools, and it actually lists scope of work? You guys didn't submit that. Do you know what schools you're going to repair? Do you know what schools, where you're building schools? I know you're doing assessments, but then do you know what schools, where you're building new schools?
The new construction will be determined based on some of the studies that we do. So the first phase is study, and once we know concretely this is where we're headed, then that's what we think the
Okay.
dollars, and that will be reflected in the capital book at that point.
No problem. I get that assessment, then you know, and when you know, you'll build. What about the actual list of schools that you're going to make repairs?
Yeah, we have an ongoing list of projects and repairs that we're doing. We can
Can you
provide.
submit that, please, to
Sure.
the chair and vice chair? The thing is, we can't really compare, right? We don't know the list of schools that you're saying need support.
Yeah.
And we don't know which schools are vulnerable. So I'm not sure how you promise equity in this plan.
So the dashboard is our start to understand from a facilities perspective which schools are vulnerable.
Yeah.
And this work will help us address those pieces. But as you
Yeah.
talk about the broader vulnerability of schools, to my colleague's point, Mr. Cooter, there are different data points that we can look at and say
Yeah.
schools vulnerable in a particular area or not, and/or overall big picture, but we don't have such a list, so.
Understood.
Okay.
I appreciate that. What I'm saying is, the word equity, and it's a general consensus with my colleagues that we are frankly kind of tired of the word equity at this point, because we're not being intentional in how we're actually executing plans that are equitable. And if we are saying that in your presentation, but you can't tell me by demographics where are the most vulnerable, if you don't have that, then respectfully, you cannot tell me this is equitable. So what you said in your packet, and I don't want to direct it just to you, because we're just conversing at this point. You said it's an equitable plan. It's not an equitable plan if you cannot, you can't tell me which list of schools are most vulnerable. You can't tell me where kids are underperforming. You don't have that assessment, that full assessment and comparing data to understand where you're prioritizing, which leads me to my next question. Then what is the process? So like the mayor has a list of schools that, and I mean by the $605 million, in that you have city spending over 5 years, right, that is making some repairs, and new buildings, right? And there's some schools that I noticed, South End is getting a new school, and Josiah Quincy, new building, and Arts Academy, right? And those are like pretty hefty investments. Can you tell me the process? Do you guys work with the mayor or the administration to prioritize which schools get built?
Yes. I don't know.
Yes, you do. And so if you do, then can you tell me what that process is like? How you chose Josiah Quincy, for example, over building or designing or assessing something for Mattapan?
Sure. So let me go back to what I alluded to earlier today around the difference between how we're going to implement now versus previously. What I mentioned earlier was also that we created a process, a cyclical process, by which we have an entry point for recommendations, a review of those recommendations, a real timeline and structure on how that could happen, a process where that gets back to the community, decisions are made around that, and then we implement and then monitor the implementation. What happened previously was that that process was not consistently done in those different areas, and we're committed to doing that now.
Okay.
So, I don't know
I'm
if
with
that-
you.
Okay.
I understand. So in the interest of making something equitable and engaging the community, ensuring that the public is engaged and have a part in it, we know that this means that you also have to prioritize more vulnerable communities or neighborhoods, right? And to Councilor Mejia's point, in that community engagement effort, how are you going to be intentional in bringing people in that don't have the resources or aren't typically in these meetings?
Sure. So one of the things that we've mapped out and committed to was updating all of our different neighborhood stakeholder groups to make sure that all those lists are updated and we have the right list. So for example, I was just in a meeting Friday and we talked about updating the list where the John Elliott Square group came up and others that we should make sure the Highland Park Neighborhood Association, for example, and making sure we have all those updated lists of association that are in the neighborhoods and make sure we're targeting and have a contact information, updated information for folks like that in every neighborhood.
Neighborhood groups. What else?
Neighborhood groups, the outreach to invite them to meetings to help, that allow them to help us create some of the engagement.
In person, flyering, in their backpack?
All the above.
Okay, great. Any social media campaigning?
As well, yes.
And we're investing money in that?
Our Family and Community Engagement Office has a mechanism and different outlets that we do and monitor with our IT department. So
But
yes.
an actual campaign that will reach parents and alert parents and survey parents through social media?
We can talk about
Like an
building that
actual
up.
digital campaign? Because
Yeah.
that'd be great, right?
We can talk about building that up.
Okay. You want to talk about it, or you're saying you want to do it in the future?
It's part of our plans to do that engagement, and as we roll out the work, we'll make sure we have all those factors laid out
Thank you.
into it.
I went on your website and your Twitter page, your links, some of them don't work. Specifically, I remember Twitter. Is there another way I can get connected from your page to your social media? Because I think we need to take a look at that.
I can ask the communications team and we'll send a follow-up of how to, we'll make sure, first of all, the website is updated so that you can link from there, and then also we'll send the information around to the counselors.
Okay.
Can I touch on something really quickly?
Yes, please.
Well, just a couple of things. One is the projects that are in the plan, they're all listed on the website in terms of like new bills. There's different categories of things that are in the capital plan, and those all reflect like prior community engagement. And I just want to be clear that the building list, the building dashboard that we've been talking about, and I welcome continued feedback on that. It was very important that for the mayor that this be made public so folks see what tools we're using to make decisions currently. We know it's not perfect. That's why we're investing in better tools, but transparency is important and feedback's important so we can also evaluate and make it even better. But that is not just a listing of things based on facility conditions. That is a part of it. It also reflects the opportunity index and other things related to some of the questions that you're asking. They're all incorporated.
The Opportunity Index is a measure, from what you guys have presented, from what I understand, by which you then figure out what phase of services that a child or family would go into in order to implement or connect families to resources and wraparound services. Is that the one? But
It can be used in that way. The Opportunity Index is a measure of need that incorporates both neighborhood factors and individual student factors so that you can look at.
But it's not done yet because you don't have that list.
We do have, the Opportunity Index is a measure that we've used for multiple years in a couple different settings.
So you do have that list by school? Is that what you meant by asking you?
So if you mean vulnerability in terms of student need, we have that measure that we use in multiple scenarios to be able to prioritize schools for
Yes, sir.
investment.
So, yes, that's what I mean. And then in order to make it equitable, right, because Opportunity Index is determined by social determinants of health and different traumas experienced or whatever the needs are, academic resources and all that. And so what I'm saying is, in order for us to prioritize projects based on equity, right, climate resistance and all of that stuff, because, I mean, we understand that people of color suffer mostly from climate injustice. So, like, that would be included too, right? All of it. Then you would know who to prioritize, and then you would know who needs it more, not equal, but more, and then that's equity. What I'm saying is, you said that these plans are based on equity, but you didn't use those metrics to prioritize your projects.
Sorry, we did. We used the Opportunity Index and
That's
we
right.
used the building condition to prioritize projects. The vulnerability that I thought I was being asked about before, and the list of vulnerability, are those schools that are at risk for closure.
Okay.
That's a different, to me, a very different list.
Okay, my
than
time
what-
is
what we're
up. I got
prioritizing.
you. Thank you. I think it'd be good if you guys could send some sort of comparative analysis between like a column of like opportunity index priorities as well as the schools and the projects. So that way we know, we see it and we can review, we can be like, oh, these 10 schools at the top priority because they have the most vulnerable children. Thank you so much. I have to go to public testimony, and to my council colleagues, you probably have like 6 minutes if I did my math right. First, we have Mike Ritter. Good morning. Your name and affiliation or address, if you choose. You have 2 minutes to testify.
Yep. I'm Mike Ritter, and thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts on the city budget, particularly in relation to the future capital planning of BPS. I have 2 daughters who attend the Lee Academy Pilot School, and I live in Dorchester's District 4. Hello, Councilor Worrell. I started the Change.org BPS HVAC Now petition, which currently has 1,268 signatures and demands modern HVAC for all BPS students. I'm here because roughly 3 out of 4 BPS schools lack modern HVAC, and it does not have to be this way. If schools had modern HVAC, they would provide provided by air source heat pumps, students and teachers inside would have ventilation, filtration, air conditioning, and fossil fuel-free heat. Surrounding neighborhoods would have significantly cleaner air, and Boston overall would dramatically lower its carbon emissions. I'm here because the Berto 2.0 ordinance was passed by this council in September of 2021 with the goal of lowering cities' emissions, with BPS being by far the largest source of municipal emissions and consuming 2/3 of the municipal natural gas. There's no way BPS or Boston can honor Berto 2.0 without switching school heating systems from gas to electric. I'm here because the Green New Deal is an exciting, huge step in the right direction, but it does not mention HVAC specifically. Window ACs are not a long-term solution. I want to help make sure the Green New Deal truly is transformative and not hijacked into insufficient half measures by the typical short-sighted planning school infrastructure has suffered from for decades. I'm here because Washington, D.C., which is nearly identical to Boston in size, is on track to modernize or build new every one of its school buildings by 2024. I believe Boston should do a pilot deep energy retrofit of a school this year so BPS students could enjoy. Was that 2 minutes?
Okay, another minute?
I'm sorry, please, I really appreciate it. Yeah, I timed it to 2 minutes, believe it or not. I believe Boston should do a pilot deep energy retrofit of a school this year so BPS students could enjoy its benefits and administrators could see it can be done and maintained for less than imagined. I'm here because I'm angry. I'm tired of Boston coasting on its exceptional educational reputation while the vast majority of its own children go to schools barely changed since possibly their great-grandparents attended them. Not coincidentally, nearly 85% of BPS kids are quote-unquote minority. Let's meet this moment with the urgency and creativity that have been lacking. As Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. Obviously, with open windows in winter, 90-degree plus temps in summer, and high CO2 readings possible at any time, these buildings are detrimental to the education happening in them. In closing, I'm here because BPS students deserve so much better, and neglecting their buildings is neglecting them. Be bold BPS, be bold Boston, provide modern HVAC in all BPS schools, which would be a tangible benefit for generations to come while helping alleviate racial injustice, improve public education, and fight climate change all at once. BPS HVAC now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ritter, for those important statements. Can we go virtual? I'm sure my council colleagues would love to proceed to round 2. They're on? Okay, great. Thank you. First, we have Nancy Lesson.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi,
I'm
Ms.
Nancy Lesson, grandmother of 4 BPS elementary school students, mother of a BPS high school teacher, member of BPS Families for COVID Safety and Mascot Health Technical Committee. The BPS budget must include sufficient funds to reverse decades of inequities and disinvestment in our district that serves primarily Black and brown students and address a triple crisis: the lack of proper ventilation systems, the COVID pandemic, and the climate crisis. Historically, poor indoor air quality is associated with higher asthma rates and hindering academic performance. Massachusetts and Boston have among the highest rates of pediatric asthma, especially among Black and brown children. Reviews of student asthma rates and environmental audits of Boston schools showed poor air quality linked with asthma. The COVID-19 pandemic brought new attention to the need for good ventilation and filtration systems. This school year, over 8,000 BPS students and 3,000 staff have been infected with COVID. The White House warns that the U.S. could see 100 million new infections and a significant number of deaths this coming fall and winter, driven by more transmissible variants. Last week, DESE announced that beginning this fall, Massachusetts will no longer supply self-tests or other COVID testing services to school districts. Boston and other districts will hopefully get this dangerous decision reversed and also press for federal funding. But this also underscores the need to prevent transmission of this airborne virus in our schools. 3/4 of schools still lack HVAC systems. All schools need good HVAC with MERV 13 or higher filters. Until this time, fresh outside air must be maximized in indoor spaces along with adequate numbers of properly sized HEPA filters. All spaces need at least 6 air changes per hour. Climate change solutions for rising temperatures must be energy efficient and maintain good ventilation. Heat pumps are not ventilation systems, bring in no fresh air, and run exclusively on recirculated and potentially contaminated air. A plan for ventilation is essential. The proposed budget must include upgrading and installing heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems that maintain good air quality through adequate ventilation and filtration and provide healthy temperatures. Only then will this budget truly, quote, deliver school facilities that are safe, healthy, energy efficient,
Thank you, Ms.
and
Lesson.
inspiring for our school communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Elise Petcher.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning.
Thanks for the Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. My name's Elise Petcher. I'm a grandmother of 2 BPS students, also a member of the Boston Public Schools Family for COVID Safety and Mascot, and a retired industrial hygienist with 35 years of experience. I really think there's insufficient attention to prioritizing ventilation. This is important because the decision-making regarding air quality thus far has been wrong. BPS installed 4,000 indoor air quality sensors with no transparency in planning, spending funds that could have been used to actually improve conditions. Here are some of the problems. The sensors don't have a visual display of the measurements. This prevents educators from even seeing the results while they're in class. They were installed in schools with no ventilation systems, 3/4 of the schools. The only corrective action is to open more windows and doors, but the teachers cannot see the readings. The measurements confirm the need for ventilation systems, which we know. The results are summarized over 24 hours, which hides the high levels of carbon dioxide which occur when the students are in class. High levels of carbon dioxide indicate inadequate fresh air. Lack of fresh air promotes transmission of COVID. It creates conditions that are bad for learning, and it increases the risk of asthma and other respiratory diseases. BPS failed to install indoor air quality sensors in cafeterias where students take off their masks to eat. Also, there are inaccuracies. Levels below 0 or below background, temperatures that don't match thermometer readings. It's unclear if the sensors are calibrated. There was no planning about the measurement needs and the right responses. These failures are important. There has been and continues to be an urgent need for ventilation, not just for COVID, not just for learning, but also to decrease asthma. Attending school should not increase the unequal burden of illness on families of color. Planning, good measurement and response, and adequate funds to do this are all crucial. At best, this was an uninformed decision that led to expensive errors, measuring instead of fixing the problems.
Thank you, Ms. Becher.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Zuleika Soto.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me? Or good afternoon?
Good afternoon, Zuleika.
Okay, hi. My name is Zuleika Soto, and I am a BPS parent, a parent organizer for the Boston Education Justice Alliance, and a co-founder of BPS Family for COVID Safety, or FAMCOSA. Thank you so much, Councilor Anderson, for all of your questions. Equity is defined as the quality of being fair or impartial, and recognizes that each person has a different circumstance and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. Like mentioned before, there are 3/4 of our schools that still lack ventilation in a district with a higher percentage of Black and Latinx families. Our children are learning and working in poor indoor environmental conditions that not only exacerbate asthma, but also the risk and exposure to COVID. As Nancy and Elise mentioned before, Black and brown children are disproportionately affected by asthma and COVID, which then adds to the racial gap in school readiness and outcomes. We understand from the meetings about the Green New Deal so far that the city and BPS will plan with community voices, but it's not yet clear whose voices will be included and who will make the ultimate decisions. Ensuring equity and transparency in the rollout of the budget for the capital plan and Green New Deal will not only help close some of these gaps, but must be a top priority along with transparency and including community and parent voice in decision-making prior to making decisions. In order to ensure students from historically marginalized populations are at the center of decision-making, particularly Black, Latinx, Indigenous, English language learners, and special education students, we ask that you adopt an equity planning tool that prioritizes those communities and ensures that they are at the table. We ask that you prioritize transparency, parent voice, and community engagement, not only as a talking point and checkbox after making a decision that impacts them, such as school closures, change in grade configurations, or new school buildings, but as an asset to ensuring equity and rebuilding trust with families. Who will provide oversight and monitor the implementation of strategies, if any, to ensure decisions on school buildings don't expand, but rather eliminate opportunity and achievement gaps in our school community and ensures access to healthy school environments for those communities such as Mattapan, Dorchester, and Roxbury, where COVID and asthma rates are higher? Where is the timeline and plan, and where is the urgency? We want to urge the City Council to provide enough funding and oversight to ensure that BPS upgrades school facilities, both to make ventilation safer from disease transmission and comfortable and sustainable in the context of climate crisis.
Thank you, Ms.
We
Soto.
ask that you ensure oversight for equity. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your insightful testimony. Ms. Sarah Horsley? Or Horsley?
So my name is Sarah Horsley. I live in Jamaica Plain, and I have a third grader in BPS. I'm also an alum. In 2021, Suleika and I co-founded BPS Families for COVID Safety, FAMCOSA. We urge the City Council and BPS to prioritize ventilation, COVID safety, and racial equity in its budget planning. For the short term, the remainder of 2022, for the 3/4 of schools without HVAC, students should be eating outdoors whenever weather permits. We appreciate that BPS now has a long-term contract for industrial-grade tents. However, the central office is leaving it up to each school leader as to whether to hold outdoor meals. We think the city should invest resources now to do a comprehensive survey of schools' barriers to having outdoor meals. BPS should also invest resources over the summer to make outdoor meals a reality for all schools in the fall. Resources could go toward retrofitting outdoor space, staffing, etc. If there are schools for which outdoor meals is not possible, students should be eating in classrooms to reduce COVID spread. We also need to better monitor air quality and address any ventilation problems, especially in cafeterias. Note that no school cafeterias have IAQ sensors right now. For the longer term, we welcome the recently announced Green New Deal, but we have concerns. Primarily, we are dismayed that the plan does not seem to prioritize COVID safety. For example, under District wide initiatives on the website. The air quality section only describes the sensors, for which Elise described all the challenges. We need clearer protocols for who is supposed to be monitoring the sensors and who is instituting fixes when there are problems. If school-based staff are to have a role, they need more training and oversight. AC installation is also a short-term fix. What about a longer-term vision of HVAC for the 3/4 of schools that don't have it? We surely hope that will be a priority. We'd like to know the dollar amount and the timeline for HVAC for all schools. Finally, as several of the city councilors noted, and Suleika described so in depth, the city must ensure transparency and equity as you roll out the Green New Deal and the facilities plan. The city should use the BPS racial equity planning tool and ensure that families and school communities get our voices heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ruby. Al Vega? I'm sorry, that was Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Next, we have Ruby Reyes.
Thank you. My name is Ruby Reyes, and I'm the Executive Director of the Boston Education Justice Alliance and Dorchester resident. BuildBPS has been an announcement of a series of theoretical new school buildings, which has then promptly turned into a series of school closures and a pandemic response that has not included transparent communication with school communities and is just now including new HVAC systems. While the Green New Deal is supposed to be something different, what is still missing from both plans is a comprehensive master facilities plan that prioritizes the realities of climate change and continued pandemic response needs. Since first released in 2017, Beja, as a member of the BuildBPS stakeholders group, has been requesting missing information, including swing space, financial reports, estimated costs for rebuilds, relocations, maintenance, program expansions, and educational plans for proposed school reconfigurations, which include feeder plans. Investing in upgraded HVAC systems is part of a comprehensive master facilities plan is vital. The pandemic is not over, and we don't know the path of this changing disease. Prior to the pandemic and currently, Roxbury sits in a second place for the highest rates of asthma in Massachusetts. Perhaps generations of students could spend the majority of their day in schools with clean air as part of this master facilities plan. We also continue to repeatedly ask for an equity analysis on the impact of school closures. But more importantly, what we don't need are more political favors being fulfilled through school facilities, like what happened with the McCormick School's green space. After years of asking for some basic upkeep of their green space, it was taken from them and given to the Boys and Girls Club to build a field house, a political favor fulfilled for former Mayor Walsh. You all and Mayor Wu can reverse this decision and return the green space to students of the McCormick School rather than support this type of unethical campaign financing. Councillor Louis Jen talked about the current building needs of the McCormick. They were supposed to have promised renovations to the school for the merger with BCLA. This school community continues to have the rug pulled from underneath them. This council can make that right. The students of the McCormick are majority Latino and Black. This is a racist decision and continues to be racist. While BPS staff has come a long way from the comical open window solution, more than anything, BPS families need transparency and regular communication. It is not okay to give away a school's green space for political favors. It is not okay to pretend COVID is over, and it is not okay to pretend a plan is adequate when there are so many holes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reyes. Al Vega?
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, councilors, and thank you for this opportunity to testify today. I'm here on behalf of the BuildBPS Stakeholders Coalition, and I'm the Director of Policy and Programs at MassCosh. We are also members of the Boston Education Justice Alliance. As has been mentioned today, it was 2017 when the BuildBPS was announced with great fanfare as a comprehensive $1 billion plan to solve a host of deferred facilities problems. But in the fine print, the only move that was really clear and definite was the closing of many of the district's middle schools. The plan never had a clear timeline, specific budget, or a focus on racial equity. Subsequent events simply reinforced the cynicism of families that need the BPS, as promises were broken and many statements turned out to be false. Now, 5 years later, schools have been closed. And one school, as Ruby mentioned, the McCormick, has lost its athletic fields, and no new buildings have been built or even started as a direct result of the Build BPS plan. People kept saying the project should have been called Closed Build BPS, Closed BPS instead. Recently, CFO Nate Cooter was conceding that BPS officials needed to face up to the lack of transparency and honesty in the earlier phases of the supposedly comprehensive plan. And at a recent school committee meeting, he proposed 2 new plans for schools, which may have been well-intentioned, but again, there was no sign, at least in public, of a comprehensive racial equity-driven plan that officials claimed Build BPS would be. The member organizations of our coalition have been calling for the creation and publication of such a plan since its inception. With a new mayor and many school committee members, some of who have publicly raised the same issues with Mr. Cooter's presentation, there was some hope things would change. In order for a Green New Deal for BPS to be a blueprint for the actual facilities assessment and planning that needs to take place, a timetable that lays out how school building facilities will be maintained, relocated, and built needs to be part of that plan. A historical analysis of what past decisions has meant for students, particularly those in West Roxbury when the autism program was removed, and students at the Rogers schools, for example. An impact analysis to better understand how future decisions being made about school facilities will impact future students and families, a financial report that helps the public understand what the actual cost of any rebuilds, relocations, and maintenance is, and an overview of facilities that in relation to environmental health and safety, including HVAC, ventilation, filters, proper air monitoring sensors and systems. And it's called, as well as an educational plan that complements the decisions around grade configurations, extended learning time, etc. We know that the budgets are pivotal to making sure that resources get to our students and they're able to learn in buildings that are not going to negatively affect their health in the long run. The proposed budget must acknowledge that cuts made in the past have meant significant underfunding of facilities for years, and even though we've seen some increase in federal funding, we don't believe it's where it should be. We hope that the most recent infusion of money is not a one-time opportunity to invest in more of what is needed. We must be cognizant of what continued insufficient public dollars means for our schools, and that our students and teachers continue to go to inadequate and dilapidated buildings that result in some getting sick or being exposed to hazards that should never be in our schools. We must not keep ignoring these conditions and lay out a clear, transparent, and comprehensive plan on what the city will do so that we don't normalize learning or teaching in these facilities. The city and the district are acknowledging that the Build BPS master plan perhaps was not the path to get us to better or new buildings, but we are concerned that even with this new Green New Deal, that there is a lack of transparency and true community engagement that will incorporate the perspectives and needs of what we want to see in these buildings and educational spaces. The business as usual mentality must stop, and we must continue to properly maintain our building and vote for a budget that will do what is best for our students and our families. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Vega. Next, we have Carrie Donahue.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Chair Fernandez-Anderson, President Bland, and colleagues on the council for allowing me to offer public testimony today. Good afternoon. My name is Carrie Donahue, and I am the Chief Strategy Officer at the Boston Schools Fund, a nonprofit organization that supports equitable access to high-quality schools here in Boston. Our team at Boston Schools Fund is excited about the investments being made in Boston Public Schools under the proposed FY23 capital budget. Along with our partners, which include parents, teachers, principals, and students, we feel that this budget helps to address and prioritize many of the issue areas impacting BPS students. With one of those areas certainly being the facilities that our kids learn in, and which many folks have spoken to today about the deep needs there. We're encouraged by the Green New Deal for BPS, the $2 billion investment, and specifically the operational staff that are being added at the city and district, and the building dashboard are a start to improving how our city supports school facilities. We look forward to continued partnership in this important work, including on the development of a long-term master facilities plan from the Wu administration. We have been meeting regularly with the administration and members of this body to discuss priorities. And although many of us in this space recall the Build BPS effort, we are optimistic that this new endeavor will properly address the structural and functional issues in our BPS schools. The facilities condition assessment is a great first step to collecting the data we need to develop a master plan, but it will not be sufficient. We must also undertake a full analysis of current building utilization levels and future school and neighborhood enrollment projections to ensure that the master plan aligns the number of facilities BPS must maintain and modernize to the number of students actually in the school system. We know that demographic trends are impacting the number of children in our school system, as well as the impact of COVID-19 on district enrollment. Since 2015, we have lost 8,000 students, which amounts to about 20 school buildings at the average BPS enrollment. And 4,000 of students were lost just since 2020. Ignoring these trends in our long-term facilities planning will harm our ability to provide all Boston students with the safe, well-maintained, and well-resourced classrooms that they deserve. Last, the city will need to be transparent about decision-making and allow lead times for communities to prepare for the forthcoming facilities master plan and any changes that are associated with that plan. That means more than a year in advance of notice for community school leaders to plan for major changes. COVID-19 has taught us anything, it's how essential schools are to supporting the well-being of children. We welcome the opportunity to continue conversation and offer partnership in these transitions to the city of Boston and our school district. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue. If we do 7 minutes each, we'll go over to 1:28 to be exact. Is that okay with you guys? And then 30 minutes for lunch until the next hearing. Okay? Councilor Murphy is out. Sorry, Councilor Bach, you have the floor.
Great, thank you so much, Madam Chair. And thank you to everyone who testified. I'm gonna jump right in, but I really appreciate it. On the McKinley, I'm so excited, obviously, to see the funding. It's so long overdue. I do just want to stress that 2 of the 3 McKinley sites are in the Fenway, so I saw that in your table. You keep summarizing it as the South End. I think they're 2 really underutilized sites and buildings for the dreams of our students, including the McKinley community. And so I just would really appreciate it if BPS would talk about the McKinley as being in the South End and the Fenway, especially because I feel like a lot of the focus on students left behind in that system has included our high school students in the building on Peterborough. And so I just get a little frustrated that we just talk about the South End campus. Okay, especially since I think you intend to do something with the other 2 campuses.
That's right.
And on that front, I really would ask that as we talk about stakeholders, I think putting the McKinley community first and foremost and thinking about what resources does that school community need, and does it make sense to be split across 3 communities? Do we want to be in 2 sites? Whatever, that needs to come first. But I would ask you guys to commit to meeting with the neighborhood as well, because I know there's been some very active interest in particularly whether this could be a site for housing on public assets on BPS land where we're doing a rebuild, but there's enormous housing density all surrounding it in the Fenway, and I think about opportunities to house our teachers, create more affordable housing. It's just enormous parking lots around both the Audubon Circle and the Peterborough site. So can I get that commitment that we can have that stakeholder meeting and have that conversation?
Yes, that's the plan, and if you have specific neighborhood groups that we could use to update our community engagement information, I'm happy to take that from you and work directly with you.
Yeah, I can provide that. There are several, and they've been hoping for a meeting for a while.
Okay.
And of course, just a sidebar, and I won't go into it because we've talked about it at length, but I continue to feel like there are opportunities when we go through these development mitigation conversations. In the Fenway, I've got everything sprouting up. I want to be able to, grab land, grab investment for BPS facilities. And I feel like, and you've all heard me say this to you in private, but I just feel like BPS has not been positioned to take advantage of those kind of public mitigation asks to actually get things for our students. So I just want to emphasize how much I hope that this new coordinated group is going to enable you all to do that more going forward. Chief, I'm looking at you just to say, yes, we plan to do that.
Yes, we plan to do that.
Okay, because I really just feel like it's tough it's always easy when a building is going up for me to be like, hey, Parks, what do you need? And Parks will say, this is what we need at this site nearby, but schools has not been in the position to do that, and I think it's been frustrating for all of us. On other buildings so the Tobin, speaking of the Opportunity Index, I think, Nate, it was maybe 2 budget seasons ago that we went back and forth on this. I've consistently felt like the Tobin Elementary and Middle School in my district in Mission Hill is one of the schools that has a really high Opportunity Index score, but gets kind of like neglected for a bunch of, like, it always seems to fall just below the threshold. And here too, right, it's in sort of quintile 4, so it's not in this list of immediate attention buildings. But then if you like actually go and look, right, at your guys' list, it's like, oh, the facade's a high priority, the external door, the classroom door, the electrical, the painting, the HVAC, like, and this gets a little bit to my question about plans before, but like, at what point are you guys gonna be able to tell the Tobin community, this is the point at which we think we're going to be able to do a major like overhaul of your building? And then in the meantime, are there any plans to actually do any of these things at the Tobin? I mean, even painting and kind of some of the basic stuff.
So as we talked about regular and ongoing engagement and updates, as we move forward with the work with facilities condition assessment, that's part of our cycle. So once we know more or less where we are as we go, and let me go back. We're in the process now of making sure we begin the facilities condition assessment that will lay out the blueprint. We just have to find out at what points in that process we stop and say, whole school community, district-wide, here's where we are, here's what we're doing, school by school, neighborhood by neighborhood. So that's one of the areas that we'll be mapping out as we go forward.
Quickly add that we also need to do a better job of communicating the projects that are in the pipeline. There are over 100+ projects that are not a part of what we're talking about today, so we'll work with BPS to make sure we're communicating that.
Well, and to that end, Chief, so in this book, right, you guys have a lot of projects, and some of them are school specific, but then some of them are just these regular kind of, you know, you're doing a bunch more exterior landscaping everywhere, right, or whatever. And I guess so nowhere in any of those projects is the Tobin called out by name in the materials I have, so it would be very helpful for me to understand whether they're actually scheduled for any work in those recurring plans for this year. So is that something you can follow up on?
Yes.
Okay, great. And, you know, similarly then sitting back in quartile 3 is the Snowden. Again, it would be great for me to understand like what we feel like the Snowden really needs, because it's split across 3 sites in Back Bay. I could be advocating for it when we see Back Bay development projects proposed, right? Like, hey, we need space. We could be talking about it vis-a-vis the Hines, but again, because there isn't that assessment. So I'm trying to get a sense. I understand we're talking about 12 to 18 months. I think you're gonna keep getting everybody saying, why isn't it done yet? But just stressing the Snowden's another one in my district that I'd love to know how to help. And then we had really hoped, Nate, that by the time we got to this hearing, we would have the ESSER plan. I think when we last talked, you thought it was gonna be out for a school committee consideration in mid-May. I haven't seen it unless I've just missed it.
No, I apologize. It's currently at translation, and once we get it back translated, it'll be sent over and posted online. We anticipate it coming this week, but it's at translations.
Okay, so yeah, if you could send it to the council as soon as it's out, and then also I would just say, I think we're gonna have to have a follow-up working session over in the COVID recovery side of things before we're moving on ARPA dollars, because the question of the whole picture of our federal funding keeps coming up vis-a-vis BPS, and we just need to have that. And I think it is also connected here. I really wanna understand how much of that we're using for capital dollars, and that's why I had hoped that we would know what proportion of ESSER was going to capital projects.
Yeah, and I will say that some of the capacity that we're building internally to move forward on projects for the project management staff is funded on ESSER. And the large portion of ESSER that went to the air quality and air conditioning work that we're doing in this year is also part of the ESSER plan.
Okay, so I think we just need all that information, and I know my time's about to be up, so I'll come back to you all probably again in another hearing just about the expedited. I think we just need, my first round of questions was really about kind of like, how do we make sure that all these RFPs are going out in ways that are expeditiously, and I want us to get more of a focus on that, and it sounds like you'll have more staffing capacity to work on that in the coming months, so looking forward to it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I wanted to second Councilor Bach's comment about the testimonies today. People spend so much time to put together their testimony and come all the way here, and so I hope you guys can appreciate that we should listen to them in between and not wait so long before they can speak. And I would argue that Snowden, I attended freshman year, actually splits itself in between like 5 facilities, including BPL. So although it's kind of fun when you're young and you're on Newberry Street, but yeah, it deserves its own cafeteria or everything else. Thank you. Councilor Braden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and we're still here. I had a question, you know, the facilities condition assessment, who's going to be doing the facilities condition assessment?
Who's going to be? I didn't hear the question. Vera Burgess is the vendor that we currently are working with.
Because, you know, I hope it's a better quality than the one that was done back in 2016, the Jackson Mann one. The building was graded as in good condition, and then it had a supposed catastrophic situation. We had to close the school. And yet, when you go into the details of the evaluation, there's ventilation's poor, lighting's poor, technology's poor, everything's poor, and yet it got a good grade. So it begs the question about the quality of the assessment. And then also in the assessment, it said the susceptibility to climate change. And it said that the building was not susceptible to climate change. I would argue that every single school building in the city of Boston is susceptible to climate change, because we're going to see extreme weather events. We're going to see really prolonged heat waves into May and into September when kids are back in school. The issues about Hvac and heating and cooling are very, very important. Heat will kill. Kids will survive cold weather. We have snow days, but you know, people die in buildings when it gets too hot. So I think we shouldn't be saying that no school in the city is not susceptible. That's a double negative. We shouldn't be saying that schools in Boston are not susceptible to climate change, because I would argue that they all are. Then the other issue, it's really interesting to see, we have public facilities here today, and we have the Boston Public Schools BPS, and we're having a conversation about school building. And we look into, you know, how we get here. In 1966, the City of Boston had an act that established the City of Boston established a public facilities department, abolishing the Department of School Buildings and transferring its functions in part to the Public Facilities Department and in part to the School Committee. So it seems like from reading all of this, how we got here, public facilities is in charge of building schools, and BPS is in charge of maintaining and repairing schools. It's my understanding of the law that's been read here. And I'm just wondering, in terms of, it seems like a two-headed circus horse, you know, like it's who's driving the bus in terms of buildings. It should be public facilities, but it should be informed by BPS. I'm just trying to understand the mechanism for how schools are designated for closure, how schools are designated for how we decide to build a new school, and where those buildings would be positioned. And then also the public facilities has the power to decide if we need to take land by public domain. And I was just wondering how often you have to do that, and what are the benchmarks that would be hit that would force a taking of land by public domain to build a school, for example. And in Alston Brighton, we don't have any land to take by public domain. It's not something that we're able to do much. But and then, you know, it seems like the schools, BPS and the school committee have been landed with the incredible job of overseeing the maintenance and repair of all of our school buildings. By law, that's what, and I'm just wondering, what's your capacity to do that, to deliver that? Like our school buildings, I think all of our issues with toilets and everything dates back to this 1966 Act. And it's been a blooming disaster ever since. And we're trying to right the ship here. And is this the best way to go about it? It's a philosophical question, like having these two entities, public facilities and the school department and the school committee, are we all dancing on or singing from the same songbook is my question.
I would say yes, and I'll defer to Chief on some of this as well, but I think for us, the last year and a half or so of planning and conversations and meetings, we've really been more intentional on reflecting about how the partnership has been previously, what systems we can put in place to improve communication, outlining our roles and responsibilities so that we're all on the same page, we're not tripping over each other, making sure we have regular cadence and informing everybody about the work and processes going forward, and building in the structures and, more importantly, capacity to do the work. So just personally speaking, since 2006, when I came to the central office, we've been cutting budgets. Going back to 2006 in facilities department was one of the budgets that were repeatedly cut and staffing diminished. Then there was some restructuring going on under the previous administration where it further divided the BPS and PFD to clarify roles and do different work. But I think over the last year, we've improved on that collaboration, and we've improved on our structures and systems and communication. And we're confident going forward that we'll be in a better position to do the work.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're singing from the same song sheet. And for the last 6 months, both these teams have been meeting at least twice a month. And in addition to that, we've had some real hard conversations to see what do we really need to have a better, more effective school facility plan. And we realized resources was an issue, not just the money that's committed in the capital plan, but like BPS facilities needed more staff, and public facilities as well, because they don't only manage school projects, they're also doing libraries, community centers, fire stations, police stations. So when we looked at the numbers, we needed to add capacity in addition to addressing some of the other important things that we need to have an effective plan. I won't get into all the details, but I think we've all sort of touched on it today, that we need better community engagement. We need better planning. And there are things that we need in order to come up with a plan. So, but we also can't afford to waste another day or a year, so we have to make decisions now based on the best information that we have, while we're also building a better long-term master plan.
I really appreciate the fact that you do, like I talked to the fire department about what's their strategic capital plan, and yeah, getting it all together. And I do hope that this new time we will start to work better together and get this done. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. Councilor Lujan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks again for all of the answers. It was brought up at some point, and so I thought about bringing it up, but I wasn't sure. But just even on the BuildBPS dashboard, the photos, and we, maybe the dashboard sounds like it's still in beta. It's great that it's unveiled and there's more work to do, but adding more photos, I think, could actually be helpful for folks to actually see the transformative work that will happen under the Green New Deal. Because otherwise, I'm like, okay, I mean, if I don't know what a school looks like and I see these 4 photos, like, okay, well, maybe there's not a lot of work that needs to be done, but we know better, and we know that there's a lot more work. And, the before and after could be really effective, and it could also hold us more accountable when we say excellent, or when we say something is in good quality, and there are questions as to whether that is true. So, I mean, photos don't tell the full story, but they would tell part of the story. So, is that part of the work?
I could quickly jump in and clarify. I think you are referring to the old SMMA BuildBPS dashboard. The more recent building dashboard for the Green New Deal, it doesn't include photos. McCormick, I believe, the gym, it is not noted as excellent. And so I would kindly reference you to the newer dashboard.
Okay.
Just to clarify. Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate that. But in terms of the photos, is that part of the work for the new dashboard?
Yes.
Okay. Chief Irish, you had mentioned that some projects will be funded only by the city without MSBA funding, with the city's financial partners. Who are those financial partners?
I didn't actually mention financial partners. There's some projects that will be funded through city, capital funding, but we are open to other like innovative ways of funding school projects. Nothing that I can speak to now, but everything is on the table. We know there are a lot of partners, community members who are also interested to seeing how they can give a helping hand. So we're actively looking at seeing what ways can we also accept support, privately to help speed up the pace of our school projects.
Okay. I was wondering, we can, and I believe that we don't bond enough, but we can do that for our public schools. On what schedule are we bonding for construction of schools?
We don't do independent bonding for public schools.
So it would just be
separate
under
from
the cities?
It's under the cities.
So it's under the 30-year plan?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I just think that we can probably bond for more projects if we have less of a, I think we do it on a 20-year actually, and if we, elongated that to 30, we could probably have more capital projects in the way, especially if we're trying to be really transformative with the work that we're doing in terms of building out schools, and we don't have a lot of detail right now in terms of how that funding is going to happen fully for the $2 billion commitment. So just want to put that out there. And then just to return to the McCormick BCLA merger, is that, and I think Councilor Baker was speaking to this as well, is that the being in phase one and what's been projected for phase one is insufficient for what needs to happen for a high school. That's all I'm saying. I see phase one is in the capital plan. It's not enough for a school that is going to double in capacity with, and so the work that is being done is okay, but the school need is a lot greater. So
Yeah.
just want to make sure that, and the community and the students and the teachers and, everyone has been speaking to this as well, so.
Yeah, having Ms. Johnson on board and stabilizing what they need for phase two has been helpful. So I know her and her team are like mapping all that out for us and working with us. So once we have that concrete designing of the school more in hand, we're able to move to phase two.
Okay. Thank you so much, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Lara, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think the question that's on everybody's mind, as you've heard it asked 75 different times, is about how we're prioritizing projects, right? And so specifically with the Green New Deal for BPS, I've heard opportunity index and I've heard facilities conditions assessment. Is there anything else that is being included in that formula to prioritize schools?
I'm going to assume that a combination of.
I'm sorry, can you speak into the mic?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So we are, this new renewed partnership is putting us in a place where we're working with all the different data sets and information we have. But the pre-K to 6 and 7 to 12, my words are getting twisted, are part of that study as well, to make sure that we're prioritizing the future of what we're building. And I'm gonna let Deputy Lapina say you can.
And also our racial equity planning tool. So
Say that one more time.
also our racial equity planning tool.
So you are using the racial equity?
We have to use the racial equity planning tool. We're going to make sure that happens. So just wanted to name that as well.
Thank you. Is there an opportunity for school leaders, parents, students, and community to, for that input to be added as a part of the formula? I think that there's an opportunity to kind of create a formula that has both quantitative and qualitative information. So how are we including that?
We'll be working with our Office of Equity and Strategy on making sure we implement the tool and those factors are included in the process.
Got it. So the decision making is going to include the opportunity index, the facilities conditions assessment, the racial equity tool, and then community input from the school communities and the neighborhood communities of the facilities.
Exactly.
Beautiful. Thank you. I really appreciate it. So my next question was about the racial equity tool, but it sounds like you are going to use it. Because just last
Yes.
week at a meeting with the Sumner and the Sumner parents, somebody said that you're not using the racial equity tool. And so
It's part of the process. So if you look at the steps in the process, the first part is stating the designated outcome. The next part is a lot of the engagement work. So what we did this round was actually state the desired outcome, and now we're going to work through the rest of the tool with all the communities.
okay, thank you. I really appreciate that. Do you have a current plan for swing space?
Part of the schools that are going offline will help with some of that, and then as we go through the studies and move pieces around, we'll be able to firm that up some more. But we do have some in mind as we.
So not yet.
It's still in development.
Okay, so we will, but it's still in development. Great. So you're talking about some of the schools that are going to go offline. Obviously, there's a plan to go pre-K to 6, 7 through 12. I'm assuming that there are going to be buildings that are not going to be in use. Do you have a plan for what happens to those buildings? Do you anticipate that there will be, like, every building that we currently have is not going to be used, you know, in the next 10 years, in the next 5 years, is not going to be a school. So
we're going to hold that off and have broader conversations around what we do with those. And I know one of the things we're considering, obviously, is administrative space and working with our city colleagues to see what else is needed, like community centers or the libraries. It just depends on the need in the city.
I would love to have a conversation with BPS about that in the future, about what we do with those school buildings. Let's see. Plan to convert schools. So I think this might be my last question, but this plan, so one of the things that we have is that we have a narrative for BPS's budget that we're voting on. This is why we're having this hearing, but it doesn't include all this new information about the Green New Deal. Are we, like, in terms of what we're approving this cycle, is there going to be a new narrative for the Green New Deal? I mean, you have the website, obviously, but in terms of what we're approving here, are we, the projects that are in the capital plan right now are also the first projects that are with the Green New Deal for BPS. So that is the extent of the changes of, like, what we're voting on this budget.
That's right. And then in future years, as we design more projects and more things go online, we cost out, we'll be submitting those.
Please speak into the mic, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. And as we do the designs and we have more concrete numbers for future budget years for capital projects, we'll be submitting those as they come out.
Okay, and this is my actual last question, and it's really specific. It's for Roxbury. Did somebody else want to answer that?
No, sure, I can add, yeah, as Sam mentioned, every plan that's in this current budget will move us towards those goals, but it also helps us to develop a more broader, longer-term plan. So we're sort of in a mode where this is an interim plan, and I know a lot of questions comes up about what's our plan. So we're actually trying to develop that plan that we really need while still making decisions now, so we're not losing time.
Yeah.
So it's important to reemphasize that.
No, thank you.
And we're also in this plan are things funded through our Renew Boston Trust initiative, which would also help to make our schools more climate ready.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, because I think that we all have questions and we're like, oh, there's a study, we're figuring it out. Like, this is, we're brand new in the beginning phases of it, and I think that it's helpful to say we do not have it now. That does not mean that we will not have it, that we are working on getting it and that we're going to go in that direction.
Thank you.
So in the section of the past commitments for the Green New Deal, it talks about that beginning in school year 22 and 23, you're going to engage some Roxbury community schools, and you have a list like the Ellis, the Higginson, the Hale, I think that's how you say it, to determine which schools will ultimately merge into a new Roxbury Elementary School. So obviously this is going to put a number of schools kind of in competition with one another for space. How are you determining, is that going to be solely determined based on the community process, or how are you making those determinations of who the winners of the new Roxbury Elementary School will be ultimately?
I mean, I think it's back to the cycle that I referenced earlier. Like, there'll be a part where we do a lot of ideation with the community. Schools regularly submit proposals. Some schools actually partner and submit plans that they want us to consider as well.
Okay.
So based on that, those suggestions, we'll do an assessment of what's possible and not possible, under what timelines and costs, and then re-engage the community and just follow that cycle. And then once decisions are made, it'll be made in a combination of what we talked about earlier, the score, the assessment, as well as the racial plan and so.
And what's going to happen to the small cool communities that are ultimately not included in the merger?
A wide range of options of either, unfortunately, mergers, or they'll be left standing alone, or we'll have to cross that bridge once we talk about specific school communities. But it'll be a range of options, either closure or ongoing, or potential other mergers.
Thank you so much.
I'd just like to add that those studies, the pre-K to 6 and the 7 to 12, are going to have a citywide impact. They're going to deliver on things that we could apply to any school community. But specifically, it'll also help us to take a look at the schools that we're choosing to use as test fits. It'll help us to, on one hand, help us to figure out the future for that particular school. But it's also giving us a citywide tool.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilman Hill, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So Chief Irish and I both went to Dorchester High, go Bears. Back then, we had a science lab. And, you know, we had a lot of things. We had home ec, we had a lot. And I'm just curious, as we continue to have these conversations in terms of investments, is making sure that when we're thinking about standards, that it's across the entire city and not just in certain schools. And I think that that is an issue that we see. So just wanted to note that. And, you know, it's a little bit frustrating when I hear about community engagement, because I've been working in the community engagement space even before I stepped foot in this chamber. And BuildBPS was a conversation that was being had, and there was all of these big, you know, billboards and PowerPoint presentations. And I just feel like we just keep going back to the same space and we're not moving forward, right? And that we're talking about community engagement, but then when you hear public testimony, when you hear, you know, the folks out on these streets, there seems to be a disconnect with what the intentions are and what the outcomes look like, right? So I'm just curious in terms of what are we gonna do differently, and like on the record, and what investments are we going to make to ensure that when people do take 2 minutes out of their busy lives to come here and testify, or they participate in an hour or 2 long meeting, that what you hear actually gets implemented.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first important thing that we agreed to do as a team is update all of our community contacts and all of our neighborhood stakeholders of all the surrounding schools to ensure that we at least are engaging the people that are in the neighborhoods regularly in
Now,
advocating
Sam,
for school. But as far as
I just want to be really clear, because the chair already asked the question and you already answered that. I'm not talking about the how. I'm talking about what you hear and what you do with that information and how that information informs your thinking. That's the question.
Sure, so we'll take everything on advisement and we'll bring it to the team and review what suggestions come from the public and see what's doable and not doable, and circle back with the community.
But that has not been the way we do business, right? People have participated. So the question is, where's the commitment on the record that if 200 parents show up and oppose a particular project, when you say advisement, that doesn't sound like a commitment. It's like a, you know, one of these relationships that you're not putting a ring on the finger. Like you're just saying, well, maybe we can, you know, have a sidebar conversation, but I need a commitment from BPS that community voice and engagement is going to be a priority. And if so, I need to get it on the record about what that's going to look like.
So I'm going to add that it is a commitment of BPS in terms of community engagement. One of the meetings that we've had with our school committee chair is that don't come before us and have these conversations if you haven't spoken to parents and if you haven't gone out to do that. So I am on record as saying that we are going to heighten and do better, because we clearly haven't been doing a good job in that area in terms of engagement. We have hired additional staffing that we didn't have before that are specifically geared towards community engagement, and we are working with our family engagement team internally to make sure that we have all the stakeholders present and involved in making decisions. One of the other questions that was brought up the other day was, are you going to take what we're saying to you into consideration, or are you just wasting our time? And I made it clear to the family, and I know the PA Shaw came up, is that we are taking that seriously. There was a proposal that was put before by the PA Shaw family that we have our architects and the house doctors that are going out to the site to look at their proposal prior to making any decisions saying, no, we're going to go with BPS. No, we took that proposal and we have our team working on what the family put forth.
And that'll be the same across all proposals we put out.
Okay, so I just want to note for the record that this is my 3rd budget cycle, and I keep hearing the same thing, and you all come back with the same answers. Like, we're really trying to, and, you know, trying to engage the community as possible, and I'd like to see a return on that investment. You know, sooner rather than later, just because it feels like lip service even to us as counselors, that we just keep going back and forth. Right now, Boston Latin Academy, the temperature is 83 degrees. And to Counselor Breeden's point in terms of heat exhaustion, people can die, right? So I'm just curious about what investments, what are we doing? And why do we have schools right now that are literally melting away?
So I know that our air quality sensors determines the temperatures that are in the rooms, and it does send a message to our team in terms of the room is too high, and they do send out our maintenance team to address what the issues are. If that is not happening, I'm looking over at my deputy and stuff to make sure that we send a message out to the facilities team to go ahead and address that. But what is supposed to happen is that it gives us what that temperature is, and we send a team out, because it's letting them know that this is what's happening. But to hear that it is 83 degrees at BLA, and nothing, I don't know the message that you're getting, Counselor, but I'm looking at the team. I want to understand why that is that way and what are we doing about it. And hopefully while we're here, we can get that response.
And I visited that school, and the air conditioning, the ventilation makeshift situation was put together by a teacher, right? So while you all are talking about making investments around quality air and this, that, or the other, it's not really reaching, right? So I just really do think this is a lot of money that you all are asking for in terms of capital improvements. And I'm not in a position here, and I'm just gonna state it for the record, I'm not here to pass any budget that's not going to give us a return on an investment. There are 13 city councilors, you might get to your yes vote, but it won't be coming from me unless I really do see some returns on those investments.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Collado, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So staying in line with my district-specific line of questioning, and then I'll go into general. I'll keep with East Boston, and then we can swim over to Charlestown. East Boston High School, the library needs to be redone before September to accommodate the 120 kids that are coming in 8th grade, is my understanding. Update or timeline on that as to when that will be done?
I don't have one right now for you, Counselor, but I'm getting one while you're asking this question. I hope for it to come up.
Okay. Yeah, I would love that information, because we're growing rapidly in East Boston. So over to, well, before we leave East Boston, I'll say again, O'Donnell School Playground, O'Donnell School Playground, O'Donnell School Playground.
O'Donnell School Playground.
Please, we need it. We need it. The Edwards Middle School, currently vacant. We're welcoming Horseman students. Last conversation we've had on that, or to my knowledge, apologies if I have this wrong, they were going to be for the babies, so pre-K and K3. What is the update on that? Are we still building to retrofit for those kids? And based on enrollment numbers, is that still the need in Charlestown? We started planning this a couple years ago when they were babies, and now they're of a certain age. So would love to get more information on that.
So
I can answer the question in terms of the enrollment. So the plan for having early childhood expansion in Charlestown, we anticipate there needing to be about a class or two more. There's always a question about take-up rate, because there's certain schools that are more popular than others. And so part of the expansion of early childhood classrooms is to free up more space in the Warren Prescott main building as well.
So we are going with the Warren Prescott.
For the early childhood, that's the partnership that we've been working with.
Okay.
And then the overall project in retrofitting has to do with making the building appropriate for the Horseman School for deaf or hard of hearing, and thank the Charlestown community for their, certainly their welcoming of that community and the exciting project that's gonna be there.
And how many years will the Horseman be in Charlestown?
To be determined based on?
Yeah, it's based on the overall length of the project, but we anticipate somewhere around 4 to 6 years in the swing space. But we're launching the Horseman project as a new school build that was mentioned to evaluate space in Austin, Brighton. And then once we have a design, then we'll have the construction timeline, and there are literally 5 other people at this panel who should be answering the question, not me, so I'm gonna stop talking.
So it'll be about that long. So
46.
Yeah. And then we'll update timelines as we get into the work, because those timelines could change depending on what happens on the ground.
Okay. You did mention working with the BPDA and planning. Plan Charlestown is still up and running, so I would love for BPS to work with those individuals and people working in the BPDA, just given the fact that we have so much development that's happening, and planning the seats based on their projections too. So there's going to be a lot of new families coming in. I'm pushing for 3 and 4 bedrooms because we need them. So that obviously brings in more kids into our community.
Yeah, so I'd like to add, so we are strengthening the way that we work with the BPDA as well, and also added a deputy chief of operations position in the operations cabinet, Morgan McDaniels, who was a former BPDA colleague as well. So, but overall, we're strengthening our relationship and just trying to be strategic just across agencies on how we invest in our capital projects.
Great, thank you. Charlestown High School, you all own the Oilies, correct? This is the Charlestown High School athletic field?
No, it's Parks Department.
Parks, yeah. We utilize it, it's across the street from us, Parks.
So Parks owns it?
Yes.
Okay. And it's slated for some sort of new okay. I support that, just through a climate resiliency lens. And then also, just for the record, I know that there's a lot of back and forth between grass and AstroTurf, less concussions for our kids, so it's a safety issue as well. Do you have a timeline on that, even though it is Parks, but Charlestown High
We can get that
utilizes
to
it?
you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And then just overall, talking about the Green New Deal, do you have, or are we looping in any consultants just in the sustainability or engineering sector, just to review our plans to make sure that they're truly resilient in our communities?
Yes. Sorry, yes. For all of our projects, we do a peer review.
Do you have vendors yet?
We do. We have a house doctor consultant, and we have one specifically geared toward peer review of our design documents. So, yes, they're an on-call.
Okay. What triggers that on-call?
No, it's just a standard, department standard. Even a small project, a boiler project, would get a peer review. Just to, it's belt and suspenders, you know, in terms of making sure that there's consistency between mechanical, electrical, all of that. So we also have, in our department, we have review architects that we do this internally too. And we look at this, and then with our clients, we meet at multiple times during the design process. We do a page turn with the clients to make sure that there's an understanding with their facilities team that this is, you know, because at the end of the day, they own it, they've got to maintain it. So we work collaboratively with our clients.
Okay.
To make sure that we achieve that.
How much time do I have? Okay, well, I just want to use this last time, these last seconds, just to encourage everybody to be bold. I mean, we're already being bold with these investments. I would like to get innovative, so I'm putting out there as, in my best case scenario, we do, you know, we turn gray to green, so I'm thinking particularly when it comes to our 3 parking lots, the McKay, East Boston High School, and Umana. I think those are the 3 largest BPS parking lots in the city. Turning those into green carports or solar farms, greenery on top. Like, those are all things that we could do to further this Green New Deal proposal. So would love to work with you all on that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just going to go back to one of my previous questions about school buildings being brought into compliance. I know you mentioned new schools, but what about the old schools? What are we doing with the older buildings and bringing those into Berto 2.0 compliance?
So we, and I'm going to pass back to Sam, we do have a regular basis where our teams are going out and assessing, making sure that our buildings meet the minimum standards, and especially because we have to be inspected on an annual basis. We're building a relationship with inspection services as well to make sure that we have the team going out to the different sites, and whatever violations we find at the time, we immediately go ahead and address it as an emergency, of course, and address the issues with our contractors and our internal team as well.
And our environmental team stays up to date on a lot of those different standards as they change. And part of our assessments is to see how we get buildings in compliant to those standards, what it would cost, impacts of it. So those assessments are always ongoing.
All right. And then will you undertake and make a public facilities utilization analysis that examines the current and future projected enrollment in each building versus the space available? So enrollment, projected enrollment in each building versus space available. And would you make that public?
So our current best estimates for projection for next year and the capacity of the school is in the enrichment response we sent on 5.2. But that
is it broken down by each building?
That's broken down by school. So within, it wouldn't separate out schools that share a building, and it wouldn't separate schools that are in two buildings, but give you the sort of best estimate for a school of how much excess capacity there is.
And the only thing I would add to that is that we just have to also be careful when we think building capacity and enrollment, because different programs have different class size limits that would not necessarily equate to enrollment versus capacity. So for example, some of our special education programs have a cap of like 10 students. And so they could take a whole class space, but class size maximum normally in other circumstances would be for an elementary school, for example, 25 students, right? But we're only using it for 9 students. So there's a lot of that massaging that we have to do in our calculations and planning. So it's not apples to apples, just enrollment and capacity is all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I understand it. And then are your plans ultimately to fully modernize all 120 buildings? Or will this involve taking some buildings offline? And I'm sure that this is going to be involved in taking some buildings offline. But when and how will we be communicating, that to our communities? And I'm sure that would mean we're not making any investments in those buildings once we make that decision. How will we be going about that?
Yeah, I would just from a sort of strategic planning perspective, I think there are a couple of near-term opportunities where we're talking about potentially having multiple schools merge in. So the Irving, we've already publicly stated we want to make that a K-6. We're going to be looking to the Rosendale schools. There are a number of very small schools in Rosendale who we will work in a community process to decide which pairing of schools or multiple schools will go into that building.
So my question is, like, during that process, are we not making any upgrades or
We will.
investments?
We'll continue to make investments where we need to. As long as students and staff are in the buildings, we'll make sure those buildings are up to code, making repairs. As long as the building's online and active, we'll continue to do that.
All right. No further questions.
Thank you, Counselor. What's the plan for Madison Park? I'm not clear. We had a meeting with the community, Friends of Madison, but what is the plan? I see this big plan, but I don't have a list of schools that are going to be built or renovated.
So we've actually started this study. We'll be having a kickoff meeting with BPS in the next week or two. And that the timeline on that is to have a final report for December to inform the next fiscal year's budget for funding for the building for a new vocational.
So you'll at least have the plan ready by December?
We'll have the plan complete. That right now, that's the current timeline, to have the study complete. And we're going to look at, the educational component. What are the jobs of the future? Does that building meet the needs? Does it make sense to have the O'Brien there, or should we look at citing the O'Brien somewhere else as a STEM high school, math and science? So that will all be encompassed in this study.
And once we do meet for the first time, we'll talk about the engagement, what that's going to look like, who needs to be involved. So all that'll be planned out when we connect.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. In terms of the dashboard, are we comparing this data with demographics of teachers as well, or we're just doing students?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Will we include teachers' demographics?
Currently, it is just students with the opportunity index, then we can definitely take that into consideration because we're always trying to improve it.
It's only students with opportunity index, or is it opportunity index for students?
The opportunity index takes into consideration the student's level of need, so it is very student-focused.
I mean, is it including all students?
Yes, sorry, all
Okay,
students.
no problem. And then, wouldn't it make sense to compare that to a ratio of the demographics for the teachers as well?
Say more.
So, for example, we know that BPS's demographics, racial demographics for teachers is over 60%. Then we would know how many students we have in schools. And then we would say, but BPS is 70% Black and brown. And then if we did a ratio, we would say, we actually need to hire this many, because we know how many white teachers or Black teachers we have per student. But then if we did that, if we compared it, we would be able to say, this is how many Black teachers we need. This is how many ELL. This is how many, and in special ed, obviously.
So I know our Office of Human Capital is the one that tracks our staffing data and demographics. I guess I'm trying to just draw the connection for using that data to inform these conversations. I think we probably have to do more work on to bring it more specifically to teachers, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Well, if the demographics of teachers, if inclusion impacts how a student learns, and if that then impacts culture and inclusion, right, and curriculum, then you would know what types of facility you needed based on your curriculum. You can't just say, for example, you mentioned my alma mater, OV, John D. O'Brien, and math and science, it makes total sense. When I heard it, I was like, oh yeah, that's all we do there. It makes total sense. I know that a facility with a STEM facility would it would be pertinent, it would make sense.
So I would just add, we're going to
Did you want me to?
I'm sorry, I apologize. I thought you were done.
No, you got me?
I got the
or-
gist of it. So
Oh,
I was
see.
going to respond by saying, we're going to be using the universal design strategy for our work, because that takes into account building a program from the needs of our students first, and that will drive what teachers we need. Then once we know what teachers we need, then we can talk about the diversity needs of those teachers. So it is factored in, but it's not as clean as is how you're describing now. But that's the universal design is what we're our approach to building and understanding the programmatic needs for this purpose.
Yeah, I guess I'm saying part of learning is diversity and inclusion, part of learning is culture, competency, and all that stuff, right? And so we know that we need demographics that reflect the student's population, but it also impacts the curriculum that we implement for students.
You're absolutely
And
right.
so I'm saying that what you're saying now, facilities should be, or at least that should inform what type of facilities and resources we need, right? And so that takes me to my next question. How are we looking at alternative methods to medicine or to psych meds in terms of facilities? For example, we have a lot of students that have to, with the opportunity index, we know that a lot of these students may need resources such as therapy or a psych even, right? Or group supports, whatever you guys can offer. But we also know that a lot of students are in meds, and then there's alternatives where people of affluent communities have monies and resources to put into their schools to create alternatives to medicine, alternatives to psych meds. So, one quick example would be the ball, right? In engaging your core, right? And releasing certain chemicals to your brain because you're engaging your core, you're on the ball, the sensory. All of these things are pertinent to curriculum, pertinent to facilities. In order for us to know what kind of facilities we may need rock climbing at one of these schools. We may need sensory rooms in these schools. We may need all these things that complement the curriculums that are specific to the individuals that we're trying to educate. And also, we may need that assessment of teachers as well so that we can understand how we're making our schools culturally welcoming, right, for our students. And so I'm wondering how we're taking this full assessment and informing what types of facilities we're implementing, especially in condensely populated Black and brown communities that are disenfranchised.
So the study will help drive a lot of, or surface a lot of that, and then we can, once that initial assessment's done, we'll put the racial equity planning tool lens on top of it and programmatic needs lens on top of that and get that feedback from the teachers, the school administrators, parents that are going to be utilizing those different types of programs and those specific needs. So as we engage the community with some of this work in design thinking, these are the type of things that'll surface. And once we know the staffing needs for the programs, that's where we as a district can be more intentional on doing the recruitment around racial, cultural dynamics for our district.
I'd just add to that, Sam, too. The study will give, it will be for general education K through 6, but we really dig into the details, like for the Carter, that there's a whole sensory component to that building, that for every sense of those children, because they learn differently. You know, we're actually putting in a pool for, you know, it's amazing. You know, a nonverbal child can communicate to their teacher in a pool setting. Like, so we dig into the details when we do a specific project for a community. But that type of sensory, it's very important to the programming of school. So, you know, that would be a component of the overall study, but that's really when we determine the next phase where we're going to build, and we'll engage with that, you know, that school district, that community.
Beautiful. And the same goes for social emotional, right? So it's not just learning styles, different learning styles or children on spectrums, but rather also social emotional issues that kids may be on psych meds and need alternative ways, like outdoor learning, right? Spaces, right? Like swimming. Like, there's just so many ideas that we can get into. But I'm thinking, and so please help me understand, and this is my final question, from A to Z, or maybe just to D, the steps that we are of implementation. Take me through it, from engagement, community meetings, the digital campaign, assessments, design, construction, assessment of the actual study for curriculums and how we're going to complement that in our facilities. Take me from A to Z. What is the process of implementation for your plan?
You want me to? I can answer that. So first comes the study, and that's true of anything that we do within the department, not just for BPS. So first comes the study, then it would be a conceptual, and within that study phase, there is always a community process, there is always estimates, and then once we get from study to conceptual to design, we do, there's 3 phases of design, which SD's 60, and then 25%, 60%, 95%, 100%. So then from that point, we go to, and again, throughout this process, it's all engaging with the community. And then at that point, then it would be a procurement 149, 149A, or pre-qual takes about.
Sorry, where is the community process after design?
They're through the whole thing, throughout the whole thing. And then we'll have another community process. It's not because at this point we've developed the program, we know what we're building, the community has had input on the design and the features of the building. Then we will go to procurement, which takes about 6 weeks to 3 months, depending on the type of procurement. From there, we go to execution of contract. From execution of contract, we go to construction. And then the construction duration's, determined while we're in design. So we know it's going to take us, to build an out-of-the-ground building to 6 stories, 2 years. So, certain things that we, depending on the level of finishes, it's typical to be a renovation, full renovation, depending on the square footage, probably be a year to 18 months. Out of the ground, typically 2 years, 18 to 24 months. To like JQS, that project is a 2-year project.
You know what would be fascinating if we could put together a visual.
I can do that.
Very, very interactive, user-friendly. A second grader can pick it right up. Lots of pictures. It talks to you, like BuildBPS for Dummies. And I could just watch it and I could be like, oh, second graders are smarter than me, by the way. Oh, I get it. I get it. So it's an interactive video, and I know what phase you're in, and it's transparent. Meanwhile, for more information, access the dashboard, right? Something that's very visual, that's animated, that gives me that full understanding of what's going on. And then the other component is for engagement, that digital, campaigning that we talked about. I'm on Facebook, right? We're all, right? If you're over 40 on Facebook. And then if you're under, I guess you're on Instagram. But just sort of that access in a way that I see it all the time, drill it into my head. As a parent, I want to understand, right? I want to see it. And then of course, I would love to be a part of conversations about how your facilities or that assessment of curriculums and how that's informing your facility design and implementation.
Thank you.
If you have, Councilor Rowe, if you have any comments, or if you have any comments, now is the time before we close.
Just looking to, work on BuildBPS with the panel, and I'm here for collaboration, so always use my office as a resource. And looking forward to also talking about the buildings offline, the buildings that we're not going to be using in the future. So thank you for all the work, and looking forward to collaborating.
Thank you, Councilor Rowe.
I'd like to thank you all as well for your partnership on the Green New Deal for BPS. You are going to be a part of a lot of the things we're asking about. Kerry gave a great overview of what the timeline looks like, but I will emphasize that the first part of the timeline, the study portion, coming up, agreeing on a design and a lot of the specifics for each school, that takes about a year and a half. Going forward, after we get through these studies and we have community agreement on what materials we're using, what's going to be in a school, we're going to take away that 12 to 18-month time frame for each project, because we will already have the standards. We already know what materials we're using. So we look forward to your partnership on that. And I just want to make sure that we also state publicly that there's also a commitment in this plan to, to equity around how we hire, how we procure. We're working with our supply diversity team to make sure that this $2 billion investment, that we're doing everything we can to make sure that minority and women-owned businesses are also being able to participate in this as well.
Thank you, Chief. I thank you for bringing procurement up. That was my one question that I forgot, but I'm happy to hear that you, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, you are going to be following BRJP's protocols and ensuring that Black and minorities people are hired in these contracts.
Absolutely. We're also committed to working with contractors who want to be able to bid on these projects, to help them so they could be certified to bid on some of these projects to meet the procurement requirements of the the laws that govern these type of projects, which, as Kerry mentioned, Mass General Law, Chapter 149.
Yeah, and when those RFPs come out, please share with my office. We'll love to get it out in our newsletter and post on our social media platforms.
Will do. And the only thing I would just add to everything Chief Iris mentioned is just if you can help us update our neighborhood contact list of who to engage. So maybe we can work with you all's office or this particular body specifically to get those stakeholders from the rest of the colleagues here, so we can really target our outreach in collaboration with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that my office, and I know Councilor Rowe is working on this as well, does is we've put together sort of the late Chuck Turner's roundtable. We're calling it the District 7 Advisory Council, and all of the leaders, of course, I have access and the information, and I can pass it along.
Thank you.
But also taking an inventory full of my district, right? So all schools, all parks, all spaces, all land, all facilities, all resources. So asset mapping, D7, but also looking at the need, obviously. So I think it's one way, and the advisory council can also help to inform you in terms of the priorities that we're working on, if that helps to partner with these plans.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right, thank you. If we don't have anything else, then meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.